On a cold Colorado morning, a woman drives through Daniels Park.
She was a foster parent, and she had several kids in the car. Daniels Park was wide open plains back then, so it's not uncommon to just be staring out the window as you're driving down, looking at the mountains, looking out sometimes wildlife. And she looked out, and it appeared to be a female body in the fields. She kept driving, and she saw a road worker pulled over and told him what she saw. And he decided to, get out of there and call law enforcement.
Douglas County officers did arrive. The investigators found a younger female, probably at that point late teens, early 20s, lying on her back.
Douglas County deputies called in the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to help process the disturbing scene.
She was nude from the waist down, but wearing socks. Those are strong indicators that this is a sex assault murder. It appeared that she had some kind of gag around her face and mouth, and it looked like her hands were bound behind her back. When they rolled her body over, it was clear that she had been stabbed numerous times.
It was dark and wet where she had been bleeding into the ground. So they knew that this was probably where she was killed since there was so much blood there.
You can't get a scene that has more tragedy in it. No one knew who this individual was. Law enforcement was really at that point just starting from scratch. Who is this in the field? How did she get here? And what happened to her?
Investigators scour the area, looking for evidence.
Although crime scenes outside are very complicated and difficult, they can also be law enforcement's friends. And in this case, investigators at the time were able to have good tire impressions and shoe impressions of the suspect because it was frozen into the ground.
You could see that there are two sets of footprints going in and only one set coming out. And they look like they were like a boot, like a cowboy boot. So we now know that the crime scene occurred here because this person is walking. They're not being carried in and just dropped.
Hoping to identify the victim, Douglas County deputies reach out to police in neighboring towns to see if anyone's looking for a missing woman. They don't have to wait long for an answer. Police in nearby Englewood say a 21-year-old woman was reported missing the night before.
The Englewood Police Department had taken a missing persons report on January 16th. The person that they took a report on was Helene Przinski.
Philosophy on life?
Your philosophy on life?
Yeah, I have one. You should just, be yourself and make the best of everything.
Be yourself.
Smile.
And smile.
Yeah, that's what I do all the time.
I first met Helene freshman year in high school. We had study hall, and I met her there. There was a group of girls that all had the same schedule, and we all made a quick, close connection.
Helene went to high school in Hamilton, Massachusetts, a small town north of Boston.
She very much wanted to be part of the school and part of different organizations, very much into drama, very much into the school spirit. She was into poetry, she was into singing, she had a beautiful voice.
What certain things do you do?
Well, I'm involved with Harmony, which is a musical group at the Regional.
They were a show choir before show choirs were the thing that they are right now. And Helene was a natural because she had this way of smiling when she sang. And she brought her personality to the songs. She was the youngest of 3 children. And her mom and dad, especially her dad, always called her baby.
She was in cheerleading. She was the editor of the school newspaper.
She was on the honor roll. She was in the homecoming court. She just did it all.
Helene graduated high school and then left home for Wheaton College in Massachusetts, where she studied journalism. As a college senior in 1979, she picked up and moved again, this time to Colorado, where she interned at a radio station.
You couldn't ask for much more out of an intern. She was spot on, everything that she did. I'd be in the anchor booth getting ready to do a newscast, and a bulletin would come across, and she'd always grab it and slip it to me. She was really not like an intern. She was more like a regular professional journalist.
I was so impressed with her from day one because at the end of each shift, she would call me on the two-way and say, how can I do this better? She was a hard worker. She wanted to do her job right and worked very hard to accomplish that.
It was a cold day, and it looked like it was going to snow. Helene came in the news booth and said, it's starting to snow outside, and I'm a little concerned about my bus ride home. And she said, could I leave a little bit early if I need to? I said, if you'll wait 15 minutes, I'll give you a ride home. I said, I'd feel a lot better if you let me take you home. And she thought about it for a minute, and she said, no, I think I'll just ride the bus. So she left. I left the station that night to go home, which was about 6:15. The phone rang about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and it was Helene's aunt. And she said, Helene has not come home yet. Do you know if she went someplace that I'm not aware of? And I said, no, she left the station right around 6 o'clock. Said she was going to catch the bus and go straight home.
She knew something was wrong, and she called the Inglewood Police Department and reported Helene missing. The Inglewood Police Department, searched the area of the bus stop that she was dropped off at, as well as where she would have been picked up at, and then kind of the route between those two, the general area, contacted businesses in the area. Did they see anyone that looked like, a 21-year-old young lady, walking? They knew the route that she walked. Did anyone see her?
The police aren't the only ones looking for Helene. Her worried radio station colleagues begin a search of their own.
We decided we'd go down near her aunt and uncle's house, and we'd drive through the alleys. We knew the street that she walked from the bus to the house, so we drove that street several times. We did that for hours.
I just kept hoping there's some other explanation. We just kept hoping for some miracle that she would be okay. I was at the sheriff's office talking to a couple of investigators, see if they had any idea, anything else we could do. My best friend was a captain, and he said, we just had a call from Douglas County that they found a body of a young female, and they want you to go out and see if you can identify it. I just knew this had to be her. This was the only reported missing young female. I just sick in my stomach. I didn't want to go to the scene and identify the body, but didn't have any choice. We drove down to the location. I had to get out and walk out into the snowy field. But as soon as I got to the body, I knew it was her. I instantly knew it was her. It was the worst thing I ever had to do, and it's never left my mind.
On the 17th of January, I turned the news on. There was breaking news, and they said Helen Przinski found murdered in Denver, Colorado. And I thought, well, it's not Helene because they said it's Helen. But, I knew deep down that it most likely was her because how many people have the last name Przinski? So I had called my parents and asked them, and they told me that it was true. And then the journey began of just the shock and horror and wanting to find out what happened.
That's awful for anybody. The community that she lived in, They're all in fear now. Why here? Why did that happen? Could that happen to my kid? Could that happen to me?
"21-year-old Helene Brzezinski has just been murdered. Her body was found discarded on the frozen plains of Douglas County, Colorado."
We have a deceased body. Now we need to try to understand what happened. They take her back to do an autopsy. All her clothing, everything could have evidence on it, whether it's fingerprints, whether it's hair.
The coroner identified that she had been stabbed 9 times in the back.
Cause of death was from loss of blood, and both of her lungs had collapsed.
The pathologist was able to confirm that she was sexually assaulted.
They were able to find some fluid, some dry fluid, could possibly be saliva or could be semen. So they took samples of it and they preserved it. And in 1980, nobody really knew what DNA was. But for whatever reason, the people working on this case just did a phenomenal job of preserving all of her evidence.
The way that she was murdered does give an indication that this is a crime of passion. And so that sometimes leads to an individual who might know her.
We were told that the brutality of the murder, it was with such rage that there was an opportunity for it to be someone that she knew. It seemed personal.
But she's brand new to town. She didn't have friends outside of the radio station.
Detectives question Helene's co-workers at KHOW.
I was contacted by several investigators after the day that Helene was found, and they wanted all the information I could give them about people that worked for me, people in the radio station, anybody she had come in contact with, or if there was anybody I thought that might want to harm her.
Her aunt and uncle, they were the only people that she had. She had no one else in her sphere of interest other than what she had developed for a very short period of time of 2 weeks at her internship.
Unfortunately, nobody panned out.
Helene's radio station colleagues use KHOW's airwaves to help police catch her killer.
We put out a $10,000 reward for any information. We ran stories on the air asking people to come forward.
A lady contacted law enforcement. She had saw a vehicle parked on the side of the road in the location that Helene's body was found. She saw a male suspect that appeared to be kneeling down by the rear of the vehicle and looked toward her, and the hazards were on.
Investigators used hypnosis and a crime scene sketch artist to develop a composite of a suspect that she thought she had seen.
They have a composite of this white male with, thick hair kind of parted to the side with the mustache, but it was aired and nothing ever came of it.
Back at her hometown, Helene's friends and family are shocked and heartbroken that the young woman they all loved is gone forever.
Going to her wake and her funeral was surreal. Absolutely surreal.
It was very hard to get through. I remember sitting there surrounded by my friends. We all held hands. We all cried a lot.
There was a casket there with roses draped over the casket. What could we say to her parents? When I looked at them, all the light had gone out of them, and their eyes were just hollow, and it was just really hard. They were never the same.
Investigators run down a trickle of leads, but more than a year after the murder, the case goes cold.
There just wasn't any more leads for detectives to go off of. In the 80s, DNA wasn't something that you can go test to figure out who it was. There were no fingerprints, so the case became a cold case.
I gave up all hope that they would ever find the guy. I thought they would never find him.
The years pass without any news on Helene's case, until 1984, when the investigation gets a jump start.
Did you kill that girl? Is that the girl you killed that has the green thing around her neck?
Yeah.
You remember her for sure?
Yeah.
There's no doubt in your mind?
No doubt.
Four years after 21-year-old Helene Brzezinski was brutally murdered, investigators get a hot lead. Two men who claim they've killed hundreds of women say that Helene is one of their victims.
Okay, the time is 11:20 a.m. We're back in our interview with Otis Toole. Do you remember if you were sitting at the bus stop waiting for somebody to get off, or did...
I wouldn't just pull up on the bus stop and wait for somebody to get off the bus and ask me to walk around.
Was this girl right at the bus stop, or was she...
I say she was waiting for the bus. It was damn sure cold out there, too. If it's snowing outside, somebody comes along offers a ride, they're going to take the ride instead of waiting on the bus.
Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole were known serial killers in the United States and had confessed to a number of murders across the United States. They had been in Colorado and had claimed to have murdered Helene Brzezinski.
She was found in a field, wasn't she?
Mm-hmm.
In a big open field, not too far from the road.
It was a huge deal for the investigators at the time because it went cold, and all of a sudden here are these two individuals who, for all intents and purposes, were really capable of committing this type of crime.
You remember having to stop the car because she was causing you trouble?
Well, Henry tied her hands.
During the interview with these two individuals, investigators were getting a lot of information that was common in the Helene crime scene. That she was abducted, that she's taken to a field, that she was sexually assaulted, that she was stabbed. And then one of them said that they had shot her in the head. That caused the investigators to pause because we know that that didn't occur.
Everything you told us today about that girl that we showed you the picture of, that's true?
Yeah. You can't just make that up out of your mind. You don't think I'm that smart, do you? I can make up all that shit, do you?
These guys didn't kill Helene. They had nothing to do with the murder of Helene, and they weren't telling the truth.
These two individuals were able to draw information out of the cops and then parlay that into a confession. And they were doing that pretty readily in this case. They were just trying to be the most notorious killers in America. And so they were confessing to a lot of stuff.
Do you remember stabbing her at all?
See, my mind's getting closed all again. Mm-hmm. Trying to guess is what I'm trying to do.
Well, we don't want you to guess. No, we don't want you to guess. We want you to think.
No guessing.
So we were back to square one again.
I continued to follow everything that took place, and I checked back frequently with people that I knew in Denver to see if anything had ever been discovered and if they were on any trails or had any new input. And every time I checked back, it was nothing.
Some people were frustrated thinking, we'll never know, but it certainly never left our minds. And we were always talking with one another about what else could we do.
Over the years, we stayed in touch with Helene's family.
It was difficult because it was way before cell phones and social media, but I stayed connected with her sister. I stayed connected with her parents. I used to go and visit them, but, you look around the room and who's missing? Helene. And that never should have been.
We were all building families now. We're married. We're having children. We're building careers. But this never left us, not for a moment. Then outside of my marriage, outside of being a mom, outside of my career, people say, well, what's your hobby? And mine wasn't golf. Mine was solving Helene's case for her family. Because we didn't think that her parents or her family should carry that burden, that we were going to start to just at least drive it with the detectives, in the sense that we would be calling the detectives, where are you on this case? Have there been any advancements? I made a promise to her parents that I would not rest until we found out who, why, how, and get the answers for them.
And when Kimberly makes a promise, there's no breaking that promise.
Out of the pain rose the commitment and drive to be like a bulldog and not rest until this was solved. Because it went cold fairly quickly, because there really weren't any suspects.
Years stretch into decades, and there are no leads. It seems that Helene Przezinski's killer has gotten away with murder.
On the 26th anniversary of Helene's death, I flew out to Colorado with the original Harmony Group and our music director, CeCe Hunt, with the goal of retracing Helene's steps. And we called every single media outlet and told them what we were doing.
4 high school friends walked the path their friend, Helene Przezinski, took 26 years ago.
Every TV station followed us. We started out the news on every channel.
We thought, well, maybe this will trigger a memory of somebody's, or maybe the killer will get curious as to what's all this attention all of a sudden.
I remember that. Yes, I do.
Now we're just looking for people that must know something. A mother, an old girlfriend, a fellow inmate at some point.
All that media attention yields nothing new. So Kimberly tries another approach, building a website dedicated to Helene's case.
I secured a friend of mine who is a software developer, and we built traps on the website to say, if anyone goes to the website, we want to, collect their IP address, and we want to know how long they sit on each page of the website. And then they would generate a report and send the Colorado Bureau of Investigation a report of who went to that website, in the hope that the killer would go to the website and we could find him that way. Because the DNA through the CODIS system, there were no hits. And so we were trying to find other ways to trap him.
How cool would it be to have a friend like that to stay with you even after you're dead for all these years? So here you have someone who is doing a tremendous amount of work. Anything new that happened in forensic science, anything new that happened in investigations, she was on top of it. She was searching it. She was trying to find an answer to whoever killed her friend Helene.
Despite her friend's best efforts, Helene's case stays ice cold for 9 more long years. It would take a new sheriff and a new unit for the investigation to finally heat up.
So when I became elected sheriff, one of the first things I did is I created a cold case unit with a full-time detective. And that unit, their only job really was to start from scratch. And I brought in Lieutenant Tommy Barella, and I said, listen, I need you to solve those cases. I need you to make some moves on us.
He established a cold case review team that's made of 5 civilians. 2 of them are lawyers, 1 of them is a doctor, and the other 2 are people that had an interest in this. He really wanted us to put a lot of energy and work into getting these cold cases solved. And he said, I would like to see 2 solved in the next 2 years.
And so we heard of the cold case focus in Douglas County. We were very excited. And we knew that Helene's case was one of them that was being worked on with this new team. And so that gave us, renewed hope.
That hope centers on a DNA sample investigators collected off Helene's body 40 years earlier. In 1980, that DNA wasn't useful. But decades later, investigators have new tools that might help identify Helene's killer.
The hardest thing about this case was who it happened to, because this was obviously a very talented young woman. When you knew what happened to the victim in this case, it just made you that much more committed to work hard to try to figure out who would do such a horrible thing.
We had learned that there was an opportunity to use investigative genetic genealogists. And, we contracted with United Data Connect to make that happen.
Genetic genealogy is using a DNA technique that then allows you to apply genealogy techniques. Liken it to getting you in the ballpark. And now you use genealogy techniques to find your seed.
We gave them DNA of our suspect to create from that genetic data a family tree.
Detectives build the branches of that tree using commercial genealogy sites like Ancestry.com or 23andMe. They simply run DNA from the crime scene through those sites, looking for anyone with even partial DNA matches based on centimorgans.
Centimorgans is a unit for measuring DNA. You and I may not be related at all, so there'd be no centimorgans. If you and I were siblings, it would be a very high number.
Investigators work on the DNA sample and the genealogy sites for weeks, and they finally get a promising lead.
We had gotten to the point with our genealogy work and the number of centimorgans that we had, we found who we thought was the mother of the person that did this horrible act in Douglas County.
It got very, very frustrating. How long before the technology would catch up to be able to find this guy? And that was always the thing we'd say to each other. They've got his DNA.
Using forensic genealogy, detectives find a match with a woman they believe is their suspect's mother.
She was the mother of multiple kids, but the women could be thrown out right away. They didn't commit this crime because it was a male sample. It was a semen sample. But by all accounts and all records, she didn't have any boys. So we thought, well, this is a problem.
Everything was relooked at again, and phone calls started being made to possible family members in this possible family tree, asking people if they would voluntarily give samples of their DNA. And as we're testing these people and getting their DNA, these centimorgans, the numbers are increasing. And as the numbers increase, that means we're getting closer and closer to our suspect.
When detectives question the woman's relatives, they get one step closer to the truth. They discover she'd given up 2 sons for adoption.
My genealogist and this detective dug deeper. And what they came up with was a very old newspaper article about a reunion between this woman and her son. And in that article, they mentioned another son. Now we knew she had 2 boys. We were able to eliminate one of the sons very quickly because his DNA was already in the CODIS DNA system and was no match. The younger brother that we focused on, his name was Curtis Allen White. Mr. White had committed a rape before 1980 He had gone to prison for that rape. In fact, he used a knife. This is long before DNA, so there was no DNA database for him to go into. He served a very short sentence for such a violent crime, and then he paroled to Colorado.
He was out here during the time that Helene, he came here in 1979, and was out here during the time that Helene would have been murdered. So now we're feeling like, okay, this could be our guy. We check his fingerprints, and they come back to a guy named James Curtis Clanton down in Florida. So detectives follow up on that, and James Curtis Clanton is arrested in 1998 for domestic violence. And once they send the booking photo to us, when it was compared to the composite drawing that was given to us by a lady under hypnosis in 1980, were almost identical. Now we know that Curtis Allen White and James Curtis Clanton are the same person.
He was living in a very small town, a rural area in Florida. He was a truck driver. And now the focus was, how do we get his DNA that shows that his DNA matches the DNA that was found on the clothing of the victim.
Detectives fly from Colorado to Florida and tail James Clanton for 6 days, looking for any chance to secretly obtain his DNA.
When you're out looking for someone's DNA, you have to be careful. What you do is use undercover officers to surveil the individual, and you're looking for abandoned DNA.
They're following James Curtis Clanton with no luck. He wakes up very early in the morning. His work truck is at his house. He gets in it and goes right to work. He finishes his day about 3 or 4 in the afternoon and drives his truck home and then spends the rest of the night in the house. And this went on every day. So there were really no opportunities.
Detectives finally catch a break when Clanton heads to a local bar.
When he leaves, the waitress takes the mugs off the bar and puts them underneath. Doesn't wash them yet, just puts them underneath to wash them at a later time. And the detective is watching it. And the owner comes in and meets us out back and hands us these mugs.
And within days, those detectives got back a positive result, that the DNA that was found on the beer mugs matched the DNA that he had left 40 years earlier on this poor victim's clothing. And we had our man.
James Curtis Clanton is our murderer. Now there's a murderer on the loose. So we send 4 detectives down to conduct 24-hour surveillance on him, because anything he does from this moment on, we would be responsible for.
Yep. All right, it is 1:57 p.m.
Still pulling down the driveway.
We met him on his property. We come up with a ruse about a large insurance fraud. We use that approach.
So I really appreciate your willingness to help us out with this. Your name came up initially as a suspect in a major securities fraud case out of Colorado. We're talking multi-million-dollar case.
We want to talk to him and try and get a confession. But I had never interviewed a murder suspect. Detectives in the cold case unit weren't comfortable interviewing the suspects for the same reasons. So we were wondering how we want to approach this, who should approach it, what sex should the interviewers be. We're playing with very high stakes right now. And we want justice for Helene, and just arresting a person is injustice. Having that person, being held accountable is justice.
Detectives are finally closing in on the man they believe murdered Helene Brzezinski, James Curtis Clanton.
We want to have an interview with him. We wanted to make sure that we could get as much information as we had, even though we had scientific proof that he was the person.
So would you mind voluntarily coming down to the sheriff's office here in Union County with us just to talk in the video recorded interview room for a few minutes? And I sincerely appreciate it.
Clanton agrees to go back to police headquarters for an interview.
So I apologize for the cramped conditions here. You're not locked in here or anything like that.
Is there a need to call in for dispatch? That's all they will.
What do you mean?
Won't be able to go to work tomorrow?
Oh, no, I was just looking at that to see if you had any additional questions.
Am I going to be able to go to work tomorrow?
Well, we just have a few more questions, and I want to try to make this as expedient for you as possible.
So I'm not going to go to work tomorrow.
I didn't say that. I just want to make sure that we've covered all of our bases so that we don't have to reach out to you again.
When Corporal Trindle slides the picture forward and says,
Probably tell by now that there's more to this than this financial case, right? So we talked about how I don't really care about stolen cars, 1980 in Colorado. But we do care about a young woman in Colorado in 1980. And we want to show you a picture of her and see if you recognize her.
I think I want to turn now.
you see him look at it, and his demeanor changed.
Investigators are now certain they are face to face with Helene's killer.
We actually do have a warrant for your arrest for first-degree murder and kidnapping.
For what?
First-degree murder and kidnapping of Helene.
You got the wrong guy.
We actually have your DNA in her on her.
When the sergeant said your semen was found on her and in her, he kind of paused and just said, "Oh." I think that was a very pivotal moment in Mr. Clanton's heart.
So at this point, you are under arrest. We're going to be turning you over to the custody of the Union County Sheriff's Office at this point, where you'll be held without bond pending extradition.
Police arrest James Clanton on the spot.
Johnson wants a picture of getting on the plane.
Police bring Clanton to Colorado to face murder charges. During the flight, he opens up about that night in 1980.
Do you remember what you were wearing?
No.
Would you have been wearing cowboy boots, shoes?
I'm sure I was wearing cowboy boots.
What made Helene the right target?
Faith.
He said he saw Helene stand up to get off the bus. He made a U-turn, and as she's crossing the street, he shows her the knife. She says, "I see it." He walks over, puts his arm around her and says, "Come with me," and ties her hands behind her back with the strap from her purse.
She didn't tell me about herself. She asked me what I was doing, and I told her that I was kidnapping her for money, and she said, "Well, my parents don't have any money," and stuff like that. I didn't tell her what I was really doing until we got into that quicksand.
We just talked about in 6 hours on a plane, I mean, anything and everything, and there was nothing that was off limits. And, one thing that we asked several times was, did you commit any other crimes? And did you commit any other sex assaults or rapes or murders or anything? And he was adamant that he didn't. He was angry. And he said that women have always been the cause of his pain in his life, so that he had his mind that he was going to grab a girl and he was going to kidnap her and rape her. That was his plan.
It was one of those kinds of feelings where it hits you in the chest. You're like, we've got this guy.
Well, she was kidnapped and murdered in Douglas County nearly 4 decades ago.
I just got off the phone with Helene's sister. It was kind of one of those bittersweet moments because this has been a long time.
I was just amazed, just amazed and glad. I'm glad that they caught him.
That was a phone call I won't forget. finally hearing that they got the guy was such a shock. It was just like this huge jolt of happiness.
I was just totally elated that it finally happened after 40 years.
It was a relief, but there's never closure on something that's so heinous like this.
More than 40 years after Helene's murder, her killer finally faces justice. James Clinton pleads guilty in a Colorado courtroom.
I'm glad that the people that loved Helene didn't have to sit through a trial.
63-year-old Clinton is sentenced to life in prison. He will be eligible for parole after 20 years.
We went out for the sentencing of this murderer, and we got in a big group for a group photo afterwards, and it was mind-boggling how many people played a significant role in all of this. We will forever be grateful for everything that they did. The big void is now closed, and now we can really start with the healing. You can't heal when that wound remains open, and we'll never heal completely, but now we can soften the edges around the broken pieces of our hearts and be with Helene in a different way now. You know, not being buried in her murder, but being buried back into the joy and the spirit of her life.
There is a stretch of asphalt in the southern United States that holds more secrets than the deep ocean. It is a ribbon of highway known as Interstate 45, a vital and bustling artery that serves as the main connection between the sprawling, concrete metropolis of Houston and the sun-baked coastal community of Galveston. On the surface, it is a road of transition, a path for commuters, travelers, and drifters moving from one chapter of their lives to the next. But just off the shoulder of this highway, hidden beneath the thick, suffocating blanket of the Texas heat, lies a nightmare woven into the very fabric of the landscape. They call it the Texas Killing Fields. It is not merely a location on a map. It is a monument to decades of unresolved grief, a vast and silent witness to the darkest impulses of the human psyche. For over 30 years, spanning from the hazy, sun-drenched days of the 1970s well into the new millennium, this specific corridor became a hunting ground. More than 30 women and young girls were swallowed by the earth here, their lives extinguished and their future stolen, leaving behind a legacy of sorrow that continues to haunt the region to this day. To understand the sheer magnitude of the horror that unfolded here, one must first understand the landscape itself. The Texas Killing Fields is not a vast, endless wilderness, but rather a remarkably concentrated area of roughly 25 acres. It is a desolate tract of land, characterized by dense, untamed marshland, deep irrigation ditches, and overgrown vegetation that thrives in the oppressive southern humidity. It is a place that feels deliberately designed for concealment, isolated and entirely devoid of the monitoring eyes of law enforcement or the casual observation of passing civilians. This 25-acre expanse is an environment that is aggressively hostile to the preservation of truth. The climate is unforgiving. The sweltering heat and the suffocating moisture create a greenhouse effect, while the native ecosystem, teeming with insects and predatory wildlife, works with terrifying efficiency to reclaim whatever is left exposed to the elements. For the predators who stalked the highway, this harsh reality was not a deterrent, but an extraordinary advantage. It was the perfect dumping ground. The environment itself acted as an accomplice after the fact, rapidly accelerating the decomposition of the victims and ruthlessly erasing the precious forensic evidence that investigators desperately needed. By the time a search party or a wandering local stumbled upon the remains, the dense marshland had already done the work of washing away the microscopic traces of the killers, destroying DNA, and reducing vibrant young lives to anonymous skeletal remains found stripped of their clothing and bearing the undeniable, tragic signs of severe sexual violence. The victims of the Texas Killing Fields were bound together by a tragic and terrifying commonality. The perpetrators did not seek out the wealthy, the highly protected, or those who move through the world surrounded by security. Instead, they preyed upon the vulnerable, targeting a specific demographic that was as heartbreaking as it was consistent. The vast majority of the over 30 victims were young women and adolescent girls, ranging in age from a mere 12 years old to 25. They were daughters walking home from school, teenagers stepping out to make a quick phone call, and young women waiting for a ride to work. The banality of their final known moments is what makes the reality of the killing fields so profoundly unsettling. They were not engaged in high-risk activities or wandering into known dangerous territories. They simply vanished from the ordinary, everyday spaces that line a major highway. They disappeared while walking along the shoulder of Interstate 45, swallowed by the traffic and the noise. They were snatched from brightly lit gas stations, abducted outside local diners, and taken from lonely bus stops in the surrounding towns. These were spaces of brief pause, places where someone might stop for a cold drink, a tank of gas, or a moment of rest. For these young women, these mundane waypoints became traps. The suddenness of their disappearances left families paralyzed by confusion and terror, staring at empty bedrooms and ringing silent payphones, unaware that their loved ones had already been taken to the desolate 25 acres of marshland just miles away. The tragedy of the lost girls is inextricably linked to the systemic and geographical realities of the era. The Texas killing fields flourished as a dumping ground not just because of its physical isolation, but because of the invisible lines drawn on county maps. Interstate 45 is a high-speed corridor that cuts through multiple jurisdictions, connecting various towns, cities, and counties in a straight, unyielding line. In the 1970s and 1980s, the era before digital databases and instantaneous communication, law enforcement agencies operated in strict, isolated silos. The police department in League City had little to no regular coordination with the sheriff's deputies in Galveston County or the homicide detectives in Harris County. Information sharing was agonizingly slow, hindered by bureaucracy and a lack of unified strategy. The killers recognized this fatal flaw in the system and ruthlessly exploited it. A predator could abduct a 14-year-old girl from a diner in one county, drive her to the secluded 25-acre marshland in another jurisdiction to commit the murder, and then speed away on Interstate 45, crossing yet another county line before the victim's parents even realized she was missing. The highway provided an effortless escape route, while the fractured nature of local law enforcement ensured that the mounting pile of missing persons reports remained disconnected. It was a perfect storm of geographical convenience and investigative fragmentation, allowing those responsible to slip through the cracks of the justice system time and time again. Perhaps the most chilling revelation to emerge from the decades of agonizing investigation is the realization that the Texas killing fields was not the exclusive domain of a single, prolific monster. As the bodies continued to be discovered year after year, and as the patterns of abduction and murder were slowly analyzed, a horrifying truth began to take shape. Investigators and behavioral analysts ultimately concluded that they were not hunting a lone wolf. The desolate marshland along Interstate 45 was, in fact, a macabre playground for multiple serial killers. It was a shared hunting ground, an unholy sanctuary used by at least 4 or 5 different murderers operating entirely independently of one another, their reigns of terror overlapping in time and space across the decades. The sheer statistical anomaly of multiple serial killers utilizing the exact same 25-acre patch of earth to dispose of their victims speaks to the terrifying perfection of the location. The shadows that move through the killing fields belong to men of unimaginable cruelty. As the years bled into decades, names slowly began to attach themselves to the anonymity of the marshland. There was Edward Harold Bell, a man who would eventually claim responsibility for a reign of terror in the 1970s, sending chilling letters from behind bars confessing to the murders of 11 girls from the area, including young teens like 13-year-old Colette Wilson, 14-year-old Rhoda White, and 19-year-old Gloria Gonzalez. Though he died in prison before forensic science could definitively tie him to every claim, his shadow looms incredibly large over the early years of the terror. Then there was William Lewis Reese, a predator whose crimes stretched into the late 90s and 2000s, a man who would eventually face the ultimate punishment on death row after leading authorities to the buried remains of women like Kellyanne Cox and 17-year-old Jessica Kane. There was Kevin Edison Smith, a ghost who evaded capture for a 1986 murder until modern DNA technology finally pierced his veil of anonymity in 2012. And lurking on the periphery of these investigations were men like Robert Brow, a mass shooter serving a life sentence who casually claimed to have slaughtered dozens of women across the vast expanse of Texas. The story of the Texas killing fields is not a straightforward narrative of a crime and its swift resolution. It is a sprawling, agonizing chronicle of ordinary girls pulled into an abyss, of families left to wander in a purgatory of unanswered questions, and of a desolate stretch of marshland that held its secrets with a stubborn, terrifying grip. It is a testament to the fact that evil does not always hide in the dark alleys of a bustling city. Sometimes, it waits patiently just off the shoulder of a sunlit highway, hidden in the tall grass, waiting for a vulnerable soul to step just a few feet too far from safety. The 30 victims of this corridor were reduced to statistics in a cold case file, their identities stripped by the harsh Texas climate, and their voices silenced by men who viewed them as nothing more than prey. But their memories linger in the oppressive humidity, in the overgrown ditches, and in the rustling of the marshland along Interstate 45, demanding that we look closer, that we remember their names, and that we trace the agonizing steps of the investigations that desperately tried to bring their killers into the light. To truly comprehend the unfathomable darkness that descended upon the desolate stretch of Interstate 45, one must first look deeply and unflinchingly at the lives that were so abruptly and violently interrupted. The victims of the Texas killing fields were not a random, incidental assortment of individuals passing through the area by mere chance. There was a terrifying, deliberate, and cold-blooded calculus to the way the predators selected their prey, establishing a horrifying common denominator that binds these disparate, multi-decade tragedies together into one cohesive, inescapable nightmare. The victims were exclusively female, almost universally young women and adolescent girls who found themselves within the incredibly vulnerable and transitional age range of 12 to 25 years old. This specific demographic detail is not merely a clinical statistic recorded in a dusty police file. It represents a profound, generational, and devastating loss of human potential that permanently scarred the surrounding communities. These were girls standing on the very precipice of adulthood, attempting to navigate the complex, confusing, and beautiful transition from childhood innocence to youthful independence. At 12, 13, or 14 years old, a child is only just beginning to genuinely understand the world around them, their young minds filled with daily schoolwork, local friendships, and the simple, immediate, innocent concerns of early adolescence. They were brutally robbed of their high school graduations, their first real romances, and the fundamental, unalienable right to simply grow up. At 20 or 25, these slightly older young women were stepping fully into their hard-won autonomy, building new careers, forging long-term romantic relationships, and actively planning out bright futures that seemed completely boundless and full of promise. The men who prowled the long highway did not care about these futures, viewing their youth, their vulnerability, and their vitality not as something precious to be cherished and protected by society, but strictly as an opportunity for brutal exploitation, dominance, and ultimate absolute destruction. The specific locations and physical spaces from which these innocent girls and young women were taken amplify the deeply unsettling, insidious, and terrifying nature of the serial crimes. They were not abducted from dark, isolated alleys in the dead of night, nor were they taken from highly dangerous, crime-ridden urban neighborhoods where one might naturally expect a heightened sense of peril and consequently maintain a strict, unwavering vigilance. Instead, the horrifying abductions occurred in the most ordinary, mundane, and heavily trafficked public spaces imaginable. The victims seemingly vanished into thin air while simply walking along the gravel shoulder of Interstate 45, an environment filled continuously with the constant, deafening roar of passing commercial trucks and the false, comforting illusion of safety that naturally comes from being surrounded by hundreds of other people in high-speed transit. They were snatched away from brightly lit, crowded local gas stations, places where ordinary neighborhood families stopped briefly to fill their vehicles with fuel and grab a cold beverage to combat the relentless, suffocating, and oppressive Texas heat. They disappeared without a trace from the bustling parking lots and the sticky Formica counters of unassuming, popular roadside diners, establishments that were woven tightly into the daily, comforting fabric of the local community. They were taken from lonely, exposed bus stops in neighboring residential towns, waiting patiently and unknowingly for a scheduled ride that would never, ever arrive. These specific locations were purely transitional spaces, temporary, necessary pauses in the daily, unexceptional routines of perfectly ordinary life. The killers consciously and maliciously weaponized this everyday banality. They transformed a quick, innocent trip to a local gas station or a brief, necessary walk down the side of the highway into a fatal, inescapable encounter, relying heavily on the shocking suddenness of their violent attacks to quickly overpower their unprepared victims before anyone in the immediate, surrounding vicinity could even mentally register that a violent, life-altering crime was actively taking place, leaving behind nothing but an eerie, deafening, and tragic silence. The nightmare began to take its distinct, horrifying, and bloody shape in the 1970s, an era that is often fondly remembered in American culture for its carefree attitude, its vibrant music, and its newfound societal freedoms, but which for the tight-knit, working-class communities stretching along Interstate 45 rapidly became a dark decade defined entirely by an escalating, paralyzing, and unrelenting terror. It was during this specific, turbulent period that the overgrown, hostile marshlands first began to regularly reveal the grim, heartbreaking harvest of a vicious predator. Among the earliest known, documented victims to be pulled from the mud were Colette Wilson, who was a mere 13 years old, Rhoda White, who was only 14 years of age, and Gloria Gonzalez, who was just 19. To carefully and empathetically consider the incredibly tender, vulnerable ages of Colette and Rhoda is to forcefully confront a level of pure, unadulterated psychological depravity that defies all rational human comprehension and basic morality. These were extremely young girls, barely out of elementary school, still possessing the innate, beautiful trust and natural vulnerability of childhood. Their sudden, violent abductions completely and permanently shattered the fundamental sense of basic security for every single family residing in the sprawling, interconnected region. Gloria Gonzalez, at the age of 19, was just beginning to independently explore the wider world as a legally recognized adult, only to have that exciting exploration violently, permanently, and cruelly terminated by a dangerous stranger's hands. Law enforcement investigators, working alongside the desperate, grieving families of the victims, have long looked deeply toward a man named Edward Harold Bell for concrete answers regarding these specific, early historical tragedies. Bell, a profoundly disturbed man who would later seemingly revel in his own dark, twisted notoriety, sent chilling, highly detailed, handwritten letters to authorities openly claiming total responsibility for these 3 specific murders, as well as the unsolved deaths of 8 other unnamed girls in the immediate area, ensuring forever that his dark, oppressive shadow would loom continuously over the sacred memories of these innocent young women who were taken from their loving families far too soon. As the heavy calendar turned over slowly to the 1980s, the geographical focus of the ongoing horror tightened with a terrifying, laser-like, and deadly precision around a specific, desolate, and overgrown stretch of dirt and gravel known to frightened locals as Calder Road. It was exactly here, in the deeply tragic years of 1984 and 1986 respectively, that the decomposing remains of 23-year-old Heidi Fye and 16-year-old Laura Miller were tragically and horrifyingly discovered by passers-by, an unforgettable event that forever and permanently branded Calder Road as a dark epicenter of the region's collective ongoing grief. Heidi was a beautiful young woman in her early 20s, actively and passionately navigating the complex daily realities of young adult life, while Laura was a vibrant, energetic 16-year-old teenager, a dedicated high school student with her entire, unwritten existence stretching out beautifully and hopefully ahead of her. The eventual discovery of their lifeless bodies in such incredibly close physical proximity within the hostile marshland was devastating enough for the local community to bear, but it was the chilling, highly specific, and deeply sinister detail directly connecting their initial disappearances that ultimately elevated the community's simmering fear to a state of absolute, breathless, and paralyzing panic. Both Heidi Fye and Laura Miller had vanished completely without a single trace from the immediate, unprotected vicinity of the exact same public payphone located conspicuously outside a local, busy convenience store. In the 1980s, long before the widespread, ubiquitous advent of modern cellular technology, the traditional public payphone was a vital, absolute, and non-negotiable daily lifeline, a strictly necessary mechanical tool for basic human communication, for urgently asking a friend for a safe ride home, or for dutifully checking in with anxious, waiting parents after dark. The sophisticated predator who took Heidi and Laura clearly and astutely recognized this absolute, universal necessity and masterfully, wickedly turned that specific, brightly lit payphone into a deadly, highly calculated, and inescapable trap, knowing with absolute certainty that vulnerable, unaccompanied girls and women would inevitably have to use it, thereby transforming a simple, everyday symbol of human connection into a horrifying, permanent monument to sudden, unexplainable death. The agonizing, blood-soaked, and deeply traumatic legacy of the Texas killing fields unfortunately did not end neatly with the closing of the turbulent 80s. The quiet, simmering terror stretched persistently, invisibly, and cruelly into the 1990s and the early 2000s, bringing with it an entirely new, heartbroken generation of innocent victims and a brand new kind of protracted, agonizing psychological torture for their surviving, desperate families. Among these later, deeply mourned, and heavily publicized victims were 20-year-old Kellyanne Cox and 17-year-old Jessica Kane. Kelly was a young, incredibly loving mother and a highly dedicated university student, a vibrant 20-year-old woman trying desperately and admirably to build a secure, stable financial foundation for herself and her small, dependent child. Jessica was a 17-year-old high school student, full of boundless, infectious energy and eager anticipation for the traditional, celebrated milestones that normally and rightfully accompany a high school senior year. Both of these remarkable young women vanished entirely without a single microscopic trace, leaving their terrified families permanently suspended indefinitely in an agonizing, suffocating purgatory of absolute unknowing. For exactly 2 long decades, the exhausted parents of Kelly and Jessica lived daily with the excruciating, indescribable pain of ambiguous, unresolved loss, their long days entirely and obsessively consumed by desperate independent physical searches, tearful, begging public television please, and the silent, terrifying, crushing internal fear of what had truly happened to their beloved daughters in their final, lonely moments. It was not until the momentous year of 2016, a staggering, heartbreaking, and unimaginable 20 years after their initial, sudden disappearances, that the awful truth was finally forcefully unearthed from the Texas dirt. The sudden resolution came not from a sudden, brilliant, forensic investigative breakthrough by local police, but strictly from the grim, transactional, and heavily negotiated cooperation of William Lewis Reese, a highly dangerous convicted predator who finally, begrudgingly agreed to physically guide authorities directly to the hidden, desolate, and unmarked locations where he had secretly buried them, offering a fractured, painful, and fragmented form of closure after 2 full decades of unfathomable, cruel, and deliberate silence. Regardless of the specific decade in which they were violently and unfairly taken, or the specific, nameless, faceless predator who ultimately claimed their precious lives, the innocent victims of the Texas killing fields were all tragically subjected to a terrifyingly uniform, deeply tragic, and profoundly dehumanizing indignity at the very end of their shortened lives. The desolate, untamed, overgrown, and aggressively hostile physical environment of the 25-acre marshland was explicitly and carefully chosen by these multiple, independent serial killers precisely because it flawlessly and efficiently facilitated the total, ruthless, and complete erasure of the victims' basic humanity. When the missing women and girls were finally, tragically located by exhausted, dedicated search parties or heavily traumatized, accidental civilian witnesses, the horrific scenes that greeted the hardened, veteran investigators were universally and uniformly devastating. The bodies were invariably and tragically found in states of severe, extremely advanced biological decomposition, or had been reduced entirely and heartbreakingly to skeletal remains by the unforgiving, sweltering, and relentless Texas climate and the aggressive, natural scavenging of the local wild animal population. Furthermore, in a deeply disturbing pattern, they were consistently and deliberately found completely stripped of their everyday clothing, a final, intensely degrading, and highly personal act meant to utterly and completely humiliate the helpless victims and intentionally, maliciously complicate the already agonizing, scientific process of forensic identification for the police. Most devastatingly of all, the physical, medical evidence, though heavily and permanently compromised by the harsh, natural elements of the unforgiving marsh, consistently and undeniably pointed to a grim, terrifying, and universal reality. These young, innocent women and teenage girls had been brutally subjected to horrific, unspeakable sexual violence before their lives were violently, permanently extinguished, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that the evil killers sought not just simple murder, but total, absolute, and terrifying psychological and physical domination over the innocent, beautiful souls they carelessly and callously discarded in the dark, unforgiving mud of the Texas killing fields. The narrative of the Texas killing fields is not defined by a single catastrophic event, but rather by a slow, agonizing accumulation of quiet tragedies that bled into one another over the course of 3 uninterrupted decades. The incidents themselves, the actual, terrifying moments of abduction, share a chilling, undeniable uniformity that points directly to a highly calculated and methodical approach by the various predators who stalk the Interstate 45 corridor. The highway itself served as the primary, deadly mechanism for these crimes, a river of asphalt and concrete that offered absolute anonymity, high speed, and immediate, unfettered access to highly vulnerable targets. To fully understand the progression of these crimes is to observe a masterclass in predatory opportunism where the everyday, mundane routines of young women were ruthlessly weaponized against them. The initial disappearances were incredibly swift, completely and utterly devoid of the chaotic, violent struggles or loud, public disturbances that typically alert bystanders to a severe crime in progress. The killers deeply understood the psychology of public spaces, utilizing the transient, distracted nature of local gas stations, busy roadside diners, and the gravel shoulders of the highway to execute their abductions with terrifying, invisible efficiency. A victim could be standing at a sun-baked bus stop in one moment, entirely visible to passing commercial traffic, and in the next fraction of a second, she would be completely gone, pulled forcefully into a vehicle and whisked away before anyone in the immediate vicinity could even register the anomaly. The sheer speed of the abductions left virtually no physical evidence at the initial points of contact. There were no dropped personal belongings, no distinct tire tracks to separate from the thousands of other commuting vehicles, and no eyewitnesses who could provide a coherent, actionable description of a struggle. This absolute lack of initial disturbance was the first agonizing hurdle for the desperate families and local law enforcement as the transition from a routine, everyday delay to a catastrophic missing persons case was hopelessly blurred by the absolute absence of a physical crime scene. The horror officially and undeniably took root in the 1970s, a decade that would tragically see the very first devastating wave of disappearances along the busy highway. The incidents during this specific period established the grim, uncompromising parameters of the killing fields. Young girls, barely teenagers, were suddenly and violently removed from the perceived safety of their tight-knit communities. The heartbreaking disappearances of 13-year-old Colette Wilson, 14-year-old Rhoda White, and 19-year-old Gloria Gonzalez were not isolated, random anomalies, but the terrifying commencement of a permanent pattern. Their vanished presences created a deep vacuum of panic and paranoia within their respective neighborhoods. The incidents were characterized by their sheer audacity. These were not rebellious children wandering into highly dangerous, prohibited urban areas, but innocent girls engaged in the most ordinary, mundane of daily activities. The predator, later widely believed by seasoned investigators to be the prolific and self-confessed Edward Harold Bell, operated with a terrifying, absolute confidence, exploiting the natural, trusting nature of his young victims, or utilizing overwhelming, sudden physical force to quickly subdue them. The timeline of these 1970s incidents was marked heavily by agonizing, bureaucratic delays in the realization that a violent crime had even occurred. In a historical era completely before instant digital communication, a delayed arrival home could easily and logically be attributed to a missed local bus, a prolonged conversation with a neighborhood friend, or simple, harmless teenage rebellion. By the time the chilling, undeniable reality of their disappearances finally set in, the critical initial hours of the investigation had already been permanently lost, and the victims had already been transported to the desolate, overgrown expanse of the 25-acre marshland. The incidents of this era demonstrated a predator who was highly adapted to the local geography, someone who knew exactly how to navigate the jurisdictional blind spots of the local communities, and who understood precisely how to utilize the long highway as both a hunting ground and an immediate, untraceable escape route. As the timeline pushed inexorably forward into the 1980s, the horrifying incidents began to concentrate with terrifying, laser-like precision around a specific, notorious stretch of the area known to frighten locals as Calder Road. The disappearances of 23-year-old Heidi Fye in 1984 and 16-year-old Laura Miller in 1986 represented a terrifying, calculated evolution in the pattern of the abductions. The specific, mechanical details of these two incidents highlighted a predator who was not merely opportunistic, but highly strategic and deeply, obsessively observant of community habits. Both young women vanished completely without a trace from the exact same location, a public payphone situated conspicuously outside a local, heavily trafficked convenience store. This specific, undeniable detail completely elevates the incidents from random, unfortunate encounters to highly calculated, deadly traps. The killer clearly recognized that the public payphone was an unavoidable, daily necessity, a fixed geographical point where vulnerable, unaccompanied individuals would be forced to stand stationary, distracted entirely by their personal conversations and temporarily isolated from the immediate protection of the moving crowd. The incident involving young Laura Miller is particularly devastating in its simplicity. She had merely walked to the store to make a quick phone call, a routine, innocent errand that should have taken mere minutes to complete safely. The deeply disturbing fact that a predator could successfully execute an abduction from a public, brightly lit commercial location, and then boldly repeat the exact same violent crime at the exact same location years later, speaks to an unimaginable level of brazenness and a catastrophic, systemic failure of the surrounding environment to offer any meaningful protection. The Calder Road incidents firmly cemented the realization that the danger was not a fleeting, isolated anomaly of the past, but an active, ongoing, and highly localized threat that was deeply and permanently embedded within the very fabric of the community itself. The relentless progression of time did absolutely nothing to halt the slow, steady, and agonizing drumbeat of the incidents, as the nightmare continued unabated into the 1990s and the early 2000s. The highly publicized disappearances of 20-year-old Kellyanne Cox and 17-year-old Jessica Kane proved that the predators utilizing the Texas killing fields were continually adapting, successfully navigating the increasing complexities of modern society to claim entirely new victims. The incidents of this later era carried a unique, incredibly heavy psychological weight, as the local population was already fully aware of the historical, blood-soaked horrors associated with the long highway. Despite heightened community vigilance and a growing, palpable atmosphere of absolute fear, the abductions continued with the exact same terrifying, invisible efficiency. The specific circumstances surrounding the disappearances of Kelly and Jessica remained completely shrouded in the agonizing mystery of their prolonged absence for years. For 2 long decades, the true nature of their final moments was entirely obscured, locked securely away in the dark memory of William Lewis Reese. The incidents of the 90s clearly demonstrated that the 25-acre marshland was not merely a convenient, temporary dumping ground for a single generation of killers, but a sustained, generational destination for multiple predators who collectively recognized its enduring value as a place of absolute, impenetrable concealment. The fact that these incidents continue to occur despite decades of prior tragedies underscores the terrifying vulnerability of those traversing the interstate. The final, most horrific phase of the incidents was not the initial abduction itself, but the agonizing, devastating culmination that occurred within the deep, hostile interior of the Texas killing fields. The physical act of transporting the victims to the 25-acre marshland was a critical, highly calculated component of the crime, designed entirely to ensure the permanent destruction of truth. Upon arriving at the desolate, overgrown location, the innocent victims were subjected to the ultimate, terrifying reality of their situation. The incidents culminated in acts of unimaginable violence, far removed from any possibility of rescue or civilian intervention. The physical environment of the marshland played an active, highly complicit role in the immediate aftermath of the murders. The killers deliberately and intelligently chose the specific terrain because it was an environment that aggressively consumed physical evidence. The deep mud, the thick, suffocating vegetation, and the oppressive, inescapable humidity immediately began the horrific process of erasing the victims from existence. The incidents concluded with the perpetrators simply abandoning the remains to the merciless elements, completely confident that the harsh Texas climate would seamlessly complete the work they had started. This deliberate, calculated choice of location ensured that the final moments of the victims would remain permanently hidden, swallowed entirely by the overgrown landscape, and shielded by a dense canopy of absolute isolation. The eventual, heartbreaking discovery of the victims, the grim epilogue to the violent incidents, was a traumatic, horrifying process that permanently scarred those unfortunate enough to stumble upon the remains. The scenes encountered by dedicated search parties, seasoned law enforcement officers, and heavily traumatized civilian witnesses were characterized by profound degradation and profound biological destruction. Because the perpetrators intentionally utilized the hostile ecosystem to hide their crimes, the victims were rarely found in the immediate aftermath of their tragic deaths. Instead, the incidents of discovery were separated from the incidents of murder by agonizing weeks, months, or even decades. When the bodies were finally located, they bore the unmistakable, tragic signs of the brutal natural environment. The remains were consistently found in states of severe, advanced decomposition, or had been completely skeletonized by the natural elements and the aggressive, relentless scavenging of the local wildlife. The intense heat and moisture of the marshland acted as a rapid accelerant, aggressively destroying the delicate biological material necessary to establish identity and determine the precise cause of death. The incidents of discovery were heartbreakingly uniform. The victims were consistently found stripped to their clothing, a cruel, final indignity designed to humiliate them in death and further obscure any potential physical clues. Furthermore, despite the massive environmental degradation, the remaining physical evidence unequivocally indicated that the victims had been subjected to severe, terrifying sexual violence prior to being murdered. The physical state of the remains upon discovery served as a silent, devastating testament to the sheer brutality of the incidents, a permanent, agonizing reminder of the unchecked darkness that was allowed to flourish within the desolate expanse of the Texas killing fields. The heavy shroud of silence that enveloped the Gore household following the departure of Candy Montgomery began to fray as the sun slowly dipped toward the western horizon, casting long, exhausted shadows across the quiet suburban streets of Wiley, Texas. Within the interior of the home, the atmosphere was thick with an oppressive, suffocating stillness that was broken only by the faint, heartbreaking sounds of a tiny voice crying out from the darkness. Betty Gore's 1-year-old daughter had spent hours trapped in her crib, entirely abandoned and utterly terrified in a house that had been transformed into a silent tomb of blood and broken lives. Miles away, Alan Gore sat 1,000 miles distant on a corporate business trip, experiencing a mounting sense of unease as repeated calls to his home phone went unanswered, yielding only a monotonous series of frustrating electronic tones echoing into the void. Frantic with worry and unable to shake a growing feeling of dread, Alan finally reached out to his neighbors in Wiley, calling their home to ask if someone would kindly walk over and check on Betty and the children to ensure everything was entirely safe. Richard Parker, one of the nearby neighbors, answered the call with a sense of neighborly obligation, immediately agreeing to step outside into the warm summer evening and walk down the quiet street to investigate the cause of the silence. As Richard and his wife approached the Gore residence, they noticed nothing immediately alarming from the exterior of the house, as the windows were dark and the front door was securely shut, projecting a deceptive aura of calm tranquility that masked the horrifying reality within. Upon knocking loudly at the front door and receiving no answer, Richard tried the handle and discovered to his growing confusion that the door was unlocked, allowing them to step cautiously into the dim interior of the house. The immediate atmosphere inside was heavy with the metallic iron scent of fresh blood and an eerie, unsettling silence that immediately put the visitors on high alert, warning them that something was profoundly and horribly wrong with the environment. Following the faint continuous sound of a distressed infant crying, they located the baby girl trapped in her room alone and exhausted from hours of uninterrupted sobbing, which they quickly scooped up to provide comfort before beginning a more thorough search of the premises. Moving cautiously through the hallway, Richard and his companion eventually approached the utility room, where the heavy door partially obscured a scene of such absolute carnage that it defied all human imagination and instantly shattered their understanding of reality. Stretched out on the floor was the unrecognizable mutilated body of Betty Gore, surrounded by vast dark pools of congealed blood that coated the walls and floor, transforming the ordinary domestic space into a horrific house of horrors. Overcome by absolute terror and the staggering horror of the discovery, Richard backed away immediately and rushed to a telephone to place a frantic call to the local police department reporting a violent death and setting into motion a massive investigative response that would permanently alter the destiny of the quiet town. Within minutes, the peaceful suburban street was transformed into a chaotic staging ground for flashing red and blue lights as local law enforcement officers and emergency medical personnel descended upon the Gore residence, locking down the perimeter with yellow police tape. The seasoned detectives who stepped into the utility room were met with a crime scene of unprecedented savagery, noting immediately the horrific extent of the wounds that covered Betty's body and recognizing instantly that this was no ordinary burglary or random act of violence. The brutality of the attack pointed clearly to a crime of immense personal passion and rage, suggesting that the victim was intimately acquainted with her executioner as investigators began meticulously combing the bloody room for any trace of physical evidence left behind in the chaotic struggle. Footprints left in pools of blood, dark strands of hair caught on surfaces, and latent fingerprints on the washing machine and nearby objects were carefully photographed, collected, and tagged by the forensic team to build a comprehensive picture of the sequence of events. At the same time, authorities attempted to notify Alan Gore of the unimaginable tragedy, delivering the devastating news over the telephone and instructing him to catch the earliest possible flight back home to Texas to aid in the unfolding investigation. When Alan arrived back in Wiley, he was immediately subjected to intense questioning by detectives who sought to understand the complex dynamics of the household, the state of the marriage, and any potential enemies Betty might have harbored in the peaceful community. During these initial interrogations, Alan, broken by grief and shock, felt the weight of his own secret crushing down upon him and made the courageous decision to fully disclose the truth about his clandestine affair with Candy Montgomery to the astonished police officers. The revelation of the affair completely redirected the trajectory of the investigation, shifting the primary focus away from random strangers or potential outside threats and squarely onto the immaculate church-going homemaker who lived just down the road. Detectives realized with a chilling clarity that Candy Montgomery was not merely an acquaintance, but a woman whose life had intersected intimately with both the victim and the husband, providing a powerful motive born of forbidden passion, jealousy, and the desperate need to keep secrets hidden from the light of public scrutiny. Armed with this explosive new information, law enforcement officers quickly secured warrants and moved swiftly to gather physical exemplars from Candy to compare against the meticulous evidence recovered from the bloody utility room floor. Investigators requested fingerprints, shoe size impressions, and handwriting samples from Candy to determine if her physical traits matched the bloody footprints and prints left behind at the horrific crime scene during the commission of the act. When forensic comparisons were completed, the results were unequivocally damning, as the bloody shoe prints matched Candy's footwear, and her physical presence at the scene was confirmed beyond any reasonable shadow of a doubt by the irrefutable gathering of scientific data. The net was closing rapidly around the Golden Girl of the Wiley Methodist Church as detectives prepared to confront her with the overwhelming mass of evidence that pointed directly to her role as the perpetrator of the 41 axe blows. When the police finally arrived to arrest Candy Montgomery, there was no dramatic struggle or frantic attempt to flee the jurisdiction, as she maintained the same eerie composure and calm detachment that had characterized her behavior immediately following the murder. Booked into custody and charged with the brutal slaying of her best friend, Candy sat in the interrogation room, facing the full weight of a capital murder charge that carried the ultimate penalty under the strict laws of the state of Texas. The news of her arrest spread through the town of Wiley like wildfire, sending shockwaves of absolute disbelief and horror through a community that had previously viewed her as the very embodiment of suburban grace and Christian charity. Neighbors who had shared pews with her at church, and mothers who had played tennis with her found themselves utterly incapable of reconciling the smiling, vibrant woman they thought they knew with the cold, calculating killer accused of wielding an axe 41 times against a mother in her own home. As the legal machinery began to grind toward a dramatic courtroom, Showdown, the defense team, assembled by Candy supporters, faced the monumental task of constructing an argument capable of countering the overwhelming mountain of physical evidence and the gruesome nature of the wounds inflicted upon the victim. They understood that a traditional defense strategy of complete denial would be utterly futile in the face of the fingerprints, shoe prints, and the undeniable confession of the affair, leaving them with only one perilous path to explore to save their client from spending the rest of her life behind bars. That path led directly into the complex and controversial realm of human psychology, where an ambitious defense team sought to delve deep into the hidden recesses of Candy's past to uncover a mechanism that could explain the incomprehensible explosion of violence on that fateful Friday morning. They enlisted the expertise of specialized medical and psychiatric professionals to examine Candy's mental state during the commission of the crime, hoping to find a scientific explanation for how a seemingly normal woman could commit such an act of unspeakable savagery and emerge from the blood-soaked room with the chilling composure to go out to the movies with children just hours later. The investigation into her psyche would ultimately yield a theory so bizarre and unprecedented that it would captivate the attention of the entire nation and turn a straightforward murder trial into one of the most controversial legal battles in the modern history of American jurisprudence. The transition from the cold, agonizing uncertainty of a decades-old missing persons file to the solemn, fluorescent-lit confines of a modern American courtroom represents one of the most psychologically heavy milestones in the entire history of the Texas killing fields. For the families who had spent 20, 30, or even 40 years navigating a dark purgatory of unanswered questions, the courtroom was not merely a place of legal procedure, but the final, sacred battleground where the profound weight of truth would finally confront the monsters who had stolen their loved ones. The judicial proceedings that eventually unfolded across various Texas courthouses were sprawling, emotionally draining marathons, requiring prosecutors, defense teams, juries, and grieving relatives to look directly into the abyss of human cruelty. The legal battles were defined not by swift, cinematic resolutions, but by painstaking arguments over degraded historical evidence, complex chains of custody, and the terrifying psychological profiles of men who had operated with impunity across multiple generations. As the gavels finally came down in these long-delayed trials, the resulting verdicts and sentences brought a fragmented, hard-fought measure of legal accountability to a stretch of highway that had long been considered an absolute lawless sanctuary for predators. The most legally complex and emotionally charged judicial reckoning centered squarely on William Lewis Reese, a man whose dark shadow hung heavily over the later decades of the killing fields horror. When Reese finally stood trial for his heinous crimes, the courtroom became a theater of intense, agonizing confrontation, where the sheer scale of his depravity was methodically laid bare for a jury of his peers. Prosecutors meticulously wove together the strands of a multi-decade nightmare, presenting the chilling narrative of how Reese had systematically stalked, abducted, and murdered vulnerable young women along the Interstate 45 corridor. The legal proceedings were anchored heavily by the grim reality of Reese's own calculated bargains. After years of silence and cruel manipulation, his decision to trade information for a sliver of self-preservation had led authorities directly to the shallow graves of Kellyanne Cox and Jessica Kane. In the courtroom, the presentation of these tragic discoveries was devastating, forcing families to listen to the clinical, forensic descriptions of how their daughters were unearthed from the overgrown Texas dirt. The defense attorneys attempted to navigate the overwhelming tide of evidence, but the cumulative weight of Reese's confessions, combined with physical and forensic linkages to victims like Laura Smither and Tiffany Johnston, proved entirely insurmountable. The judicial system, though agonizingly slow, ultimately delivered the ultimate legal sanction. Reese was formally convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death, sealing his fate behind the impenetrable walls of the state's maximum security prison system, ensuring that the man who had terrorized the highway for so long would never again walk free among the living. While the prosecution of William Lewis Reese dominated the headlines of the later eras, the judicial system was simultaneously forced to reckon with ghosts from the earlier, deeply frustrating chapters of the Killing Fields timeline. One of the most significant legal triumphs of modern accountability occurred in 2012, when the long-dormant 1986 murder of Christine Pynchon finally reached a definitive and resolute conclusion in a court of law. For over 25 years, Christine's tragic death had remained an open, frustrating wound, a case that had completely stalled out in the mid-'80s due to the primitive state of forensic technology and the total absence of viable suspect leads. However, the courtroom in 2012 witnessed a powerful demonstration of how science could successfully conquer time. Prosecutors presented groundbreaking, undeniable evidence derived from the application of advanced DNA profiling techniques to preserve biological samples that had sat forgotten in a police evidence locker for a quarter of a century. The genetic profile isolated from those decades-old exhibits pointed directly and unequivocally to Kevin Edison Smith. The trial itself was a masterclass in modern forensic jurisprudence, as expert witnesses methodically explained to the jury how microscopic traces of DNA could survive the harsh, destructive environment of a Texas marshland and ultimately whisper the truth from the grave. Facing the insurmountable wall of genetic certainty, Smith was formally convicted for the brutal slaying of Christine Pynchon, bringing a powerful, long-overdue sense of legal closure to a family that had endured decades of agonizing silence, and proving decisively that the passage of time could no longer serve as an absolute shield for a determined murderer. The judicial reckoning also had to grapple with figures who managed to escape the formal mechanics of a traditional murder trial through the ultimate intervention of mortality, leaving behind a complex, unsatisfying legal legacy of unprosecuted terror. Such was the case with Edward Harold Bell, a deeply disturbed and manipulative individual who had cast a long, oppressive shadow over the 1970s victims of the Killing Fields, including young girls like Colette Wilson, Rhoda White, and Gloria Gonzalez. Bell had spent years playing an elaborate, cruel psychological game with law enforcement from his prison cell, sending chilling, highly detailed handwritten letters that explicitly confessed to the murders of 11 young women in the area, seemingly reveling in the helpless frustration of investigators who struggled to corroborate every single claim with hard forensic proof. While Bell's detailed confessions provided a terrifying, intimate look into the mindset of a classic predatory killer, the formal legal system requires a rigorous burden of proof that goes far beyond written admissions, demanding physical and forensic corroboration that was frequently impossible to secure after decades of environmental destruction in the marshland. Consequently, a traditional, comprehensive murder trial for all of Bell's claimed victims never fully materialized in a courtroom. The legal system was ultimately forced to witness his exit from this world on his own terms. Bell passed away behind bars in 2019, taking many of his deepest, darkest secrets permanently with him to the grave. Though he escaped the formal condemnation of a death penalty verdict for his specific Killing Fields atrocities, the meticulous investigative work and the preservation of his own written words ensured that his dark notoriety was permanently recorded in the legal archives as an undeniable, chilling testament to the early years of the highway's terror. The broader judicial picture of the Texas Killing Fields also encompassed fringe figures and opportunistic predators like Robert Brow, a violent mass shooter who was already safely locked away behind bars serving a severe, unyielding life sentence for unrelated acts of extreme violence. Brow added a disturbing, chaotic layer to the region's historical ledger by casually claiming to investigators that he had personally slaughtered dozens of women across the vast, sprawling expanse of the state of Texas, his boasts echoing the dark, lawless ethos that had defined the I-45 corridor for decades. While the legal system was naturally skeptical of unverified prison boasts, the sheer volume of such claims highlighted the terrifying reality of the highway. It was a magnetic north for violent men who viewed the vulnerable as disposable commodities. The cumulative legal outcome of the Texas Killing Fields remains a profoundly sobering and bittersweet reality for the surviving families and the dedicated detectives who devoted their lives to the pursuit of justice. It was never a clean, neat narrative with a single antagonist brought swiftly to a definitive, unified trial. Instead, justice arrived in jagged, fragmented pieces, spread out over nearly half a century, achieved only through the grinding gears of advancing science, interagency cooperation, and the agonizing extraction of late-stage confessions. The courtrooms have emptied, the gavels have fallen silent, and the final verdicts have been permanently entered into the historical record, but the legal closure achieved is forever shadowed by the immense, irreplaceable loss of the vibrant young lives that were so callously extinguished in the dark mud just feet away from the rushing traffic of Interstate 45. The legacy left behind by the decades of terror along the Interstate 45 corridor extends far beyond the legal verdicts, closed case files, and courtroom gavels, embedding itself deeply and permanently into the collective consciousness of the American criminal justice landscape. The 25-acre patch of overgrown marshland known universally as the Texas Killing Fields ceased long ago to be merely a geographical location on a regional map. It transformed irrevocably into a haunting, enduring monument to systemic failure, human cruelty, and an unimaginable depth of unresolved community grief. When travelers, commuters, and local residents drive along that bustling ribbon of highway today, the asphalt carries an invisible, heavy weight, a somber reminder of the young lives that were violently extinguished just yards away from the fast-moving traffic. The landscape itself, with its dense vegetation, murky water, and oppressive humidity, stands as a silent, eternal witness to a dark era when a combination of geographical isolation, institutional fragmentation, and predatory opportunism created a lawless playground for monsters who operated with absolute impunity. The sheer horror of what transpired across the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s forces a permanent, uncomfortable reckoning with the reality that extreme violence does not always announce itself with dramatic chaos in dark urban alleys, but can instead quietly unfold in plain sight, hidden just beneath the surface of everyday life along a sunny, heavily traveled coastal route. For the families who survived the nightmare, the conclusion of the legal proceedings and the passing of decades did not bring a simple, neat Hollywood ending or a complete erasure of their profound, daily pain. Instead, they were left to navigate a permanent state of altered existence, carrying the crushing, generational burden of a loss that defied all natural laws of human experience. Parents who watched their teenage daughters walk out the front door to make a phone call, buy a soda, or catch a local bus in the 1970s or 80s spent the remainder of their lives trapped in an agonizing purgatory of unknowing, their golden years entirely consumed by the haunting question of what their children felt in their final, terrifying moments. Even when monumental breakthroughs finally arrived, such as the grim, transactional cooperation of William Lewis Reese in 2016 that finally exposed the shallow graves of Kelly and Cox and Jessica Kane after 20 years of agonizing silence, the resulting closure was profoundly fragmented and bittersweet. Discovering skeletal remains wrapped in the damp Texas mud provided a tangible, physical site for grief, but it simultaneously tore open old wounds, confirming the worst nightmares that families had desperately tried to fight off for half a lifetime. The surviving relatives of victims like Colette Wilson, Rhoda White, Gloria Gonzalez, Heidi Fye, Laura Miller, and Christine Pinchin became reluctant, tragic torchbearers for reform, using their unimaginable personal suffering to demand accountability, push for institutional change, and ensure that the world would never forget the human cost behind the cold statistics of a police log. The horrific chapters of the Texas Killing Fields also served as a harsh, unyielding catalyst for a profound and necessary evolution within the American law enforcement and investigative community. The staggering, systemic failures that plagued the early decades of the search, the rigid, insular jurisdictional boundaries between the League City Police Department, the Galveston County Sheriff's Office, and Harris County, the complete absence of unified data-sharing networks, and the agonizing bureaucratic delays that allowed multiple independent serial killers like Edward Harold Bell, William Lewis Reese, and Kevin Edison Smith to slip effortlessly between the cracks, exposed fatal vulnerabilities in how society protected its most vulnerable citizens. The painful lessons learned from the decades of lost evidence, compromised marshland crime scenes, and slow-moving paperwork forced a sweeping modernization of investigative protocols. Modern policing along major American transit corridors was permanently reshaped by these tragedies, giving rise to sophisticated multi-agency task forces, centralized missing persons databases, and advanced cross-jurisdictional cooperation agreements designed specifically to ensure that a predator could no longer use a county line as an invisible shield against justice. Furthermore, the rapid, monumental evolution of forensic science, moving from the primitive, non-existent DNA tools of the 1970s to the ultra-sensitive genetic profiling techniques that successfully cracked long-dormant cold cases decades later, proved that scientific perseverance could eventually bridge the gap left by historical human error, offering a vital glimmer of hope that time and environmental degradation would no longer guarantee absolute immunity for those who prey on the helpless. On a broader cultural and sociological level, the dark legacy of the Texas killing fields forces a deep, uncomfortable examination of how society defines vulnerability, risk, and public safety. The victims who fell prey to the multiple killers operating along Interstate 45 were not high-profile figures or individuals moving through dangerous, high-crime enclaves. They were ordinary young women and adolescent girls between the ages of 12 and 25, engaged in the most routine, mundane, and necessary activities of daily teenage and young adult life. They were students walking home from school, daughters running brief local errands, and young mothers striving to build a stable foundation for their families. The predators who targeted them weaponized this very ordinariness, transforming everyday public spaces like brightly lit gas stations, local convenience store payphones, and rural bus stops into deadly, inescapable traps. This stark reality dismantled the comforting, naive societal illusion that danger is always exotic, distant, or easily identifiable, laying bare the terrifying truth that evil can comfortably wear an ordinary mask, blend seamlessly into the background noise of highway transit, and strike with blinding speed in broad daylight. The stories of the killing fields serve as a grim, permanent reminder of the fragile boundary that separates the safety of a normal, routine afternoon from an irreversible nightmare, prompting a lasting cultural sensitivity toward the safety of young people and the absolute necessity of maintaining constant, vigilant community awareness in an increasingly transient and fast-paced world. Ultimately, beyond the analytical breakdowns of forensic technology, the complex legal maneuvering of courtroom trials, and the grim statistics of multi-predator profiling, the truest and most vital reflection of the Texas killing fields belongs entirely to the memory of the victims themselves. For far too long, the 30-plus young women and girls whose lives were stolen along that desolate 25-acre corridor ran the risk of being reduced in the public imagination to mere anonymous footnotes in the dark history of American true crime, overshadowed by the morbid fascination surrounding the monsters who hunted them. Yet, beneath the grim reality of advanced decomposition, the hostile marshland mud, and the calculated indignities inflicted by men like Edward Harold Bell, William Lewis Reese, and Kevin Edison Smith, each victim was a complete, vibrant human being with an entire, unwritten universe of potential, dreams, relationships, and laughter waiting to be lived. They were daughters who brought immense joy to their parents, sisters who anchored family dynamics, friends who shared secret adolescent dreams, and young individuals who deserved every single fundamental right to grow old, make mistakes, build careers, and experience the simple beauty of a full life. By refusing to let their names fade into the quiet humidity of the Texas coast, by demanding truth through decades of agonizing silence, and by honoring their memories with unwavering dignity, society ensures that their voices are never truly lost. The overgrown marshland along Interstate 45 will forever remain a scarred, haunted landscape, but the true enduring legacy of the Texas killing fields is the collective, unyielding promise that the innocent souls taken there will never be forgotten, and that their stories will continue to stand as a powerful, eternal testament to the resilience of human memory and the ultimate, necessary pursuit of absolute justice. Even as the decades continue to slip quietly into the past, carrying with them the fading memories of an era defined by terror, the story of the Texas killing fields remains fundamentally unfinished and open-wound that refuses to completely heal despite the passage of time, while landmark trials, disputed confessions, and groundbreaking forensic linkages have brought a measure of legal accountability for several of the horrific crimes. The chilling reality is that the 25-acre patch of marshland along Interstate 45 still guards secrets that have never been brought into the light. There are remaining files sitting in the dusty archives of local police departments' cold case binders, filled with faded photographs, yellowed police reports, and circumstantial notes that point toward victims whose identities were never conclusively established and perpetrators whose names were never unmasked by the authorities the pursuit of. Absolute truth in this desolate corridor is not a static historical exercise but an active daily battle against time, environmental degradation, and the quiet fading of human memory. Modern investigators, forensic scientists, and dedicated cold case advocates refuse to let the darkness reclaim the remaining victims, pushing relentlessly forward with advanced tools, renewed institutional dedication, and an unwavering commitment to justice that completely transcends the decades of silence and bureaucratic failure that once allowed these monsters to operate with absolute impunity in the shadow of the highway. At the absolute heart of this ongoing, tireless modern effort is the revolutionary application of advanced genetic genealogy and cutting-edge DNA phenotyping technologies that would have sounded like pure science fiction to the early detectives who first walked the overgrown trails of Calder Road in the 1970s and 80s when physical evidence was originally recovered from the hostile, moisture-laden marshland. The primitive forensic capabilities of the era meant that delicate biological material quickly degraded, rendering it completely useless for traditional profiling methods today. However, specialized private laboratories and dedicated forensic genealogists are revisiting those same compromised evidence lockers with extraordinary microscopic precision by extracting minuscule traces of degraded DNA from bone fragments, hair strands, and personal artifacts. Scientists can now construct detailed family trees cross-referencing genetic profiles against vast commercial databases to identify previously unknown victims or link genetic markers directly to elusive suspects who managed to evade capture during their lifetimes. This sophisticated scientific frontier offers a powerful, renewed glimmer of hope for cases that had long been written off as permanently unsolvable, transforming anonymous skeletal remains back into human beings with names, families, and histories that truly deserve to be spoken aloud by those who fight tirelessly for them across the country, while ensuring that every single victim is remembered with profound, enduring respect and unwavering dedication to the truth today and always. The evolution of investigative methodology has also been profoundly shaped by the painful lessons of the past, specifically the disastrous bureaucratic silos that allowed multiple predators to operate simultaneously without detection across overlapping county lines in response to the historical failures that plagued the early decades of the Texas killing fields investigations. Modern law enforcement agencies have fundamentally restructured how they approach multi-jurisdictional crimes along major transit corridors. Today, sophisticated regional task forces, unified digital databases, and collaborative intelligence sharing networks ensure that a missing persons report filed in one municipal district instantly alerts neighboring jurisdictions, completely closing the deadly loopholes that past monsters exploited so ruthlessly. Cold case detectives no longer operate in isolated vacuums. Instead, they work as part of a synchronized, highly specialized network of law enforcement professionals, behavioral analysts, and forensic experts who routinely compare notes, re-examine old witness testimonies, and pool their resources to connect the dots across decades of criminal activity. The structural transformation guarantees that if a predator attempts to use the Interstate 45 corridor as a hunting ground today, they will face a unified, highly coordinated wall of institutional resistance designed from the ground up to prevent another generation of tragedy from unfolding along the lonely stretches of the highway, ensuring absolute maximum protection and enduring accountability for everyone who travels through the region today, without exception, ever again. Yet despite these remarkable technological advancements and structural reforms, the human element remains the most vital driving force behind the ongoing pursuit of justice for the Texas killing fields. The retired detectives who spent their entire careers haunted by the empty evidence boards, the grieving family members who have spent decades marching for answers, and the new generation of investigators who inherit these heavy files share a profound, unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of shared sorrow and relentless determination. For these individuals, a cold case is never just a stack of papers or a forgotten statistic. It represents a personal promise made to the families who still wait by the phone, a solemn oath that no victim will ever truly be forgotten, no matter how many years have passed since they last walked the shoulder of the highway. This deep empathy fuels countless hours of painstaking archive reviews, late night evidence re-examinations, and emotional meetings with Elderly witnesses whose memories may be frail but whose desire to see right prevail remains completely undiminished. It is a powerful reminder that behind every scientific breakthrough and every legal verdict lies a deeply human story of love loss and an unyielding refusal to let darkness have the final word in the lives of the innocent who truly deserve eternal peace and respectful remembrance forevermore, starting today and always right here. The legacy of the Texas killing fields also extends far beyond the immediate geographical boundaries of the 25-acre marshland, serving as a permanent cautionary touchstone for the broader national consciousness regarding the safety and protection of the vulnerable. The tragedies that unfolded along Interstate 45 forced a systemic cultural awakening about the hidden dangers that can accompany the transient, fast-paced nature of modern American life, reminding communities everywhere that predators frequently lurk in plain sight, blending seamlessly into the everyday background of highway transit and routine daily commerce. This heightened awareness has fundamentally transformed how communities approach public safety, leading to improved community watch initiatives, enhanced security measures around public transit hubs, and a greater cultural emphasis on educating young people about situational awareness without instilling paralyzing fear. The terrifying history of the corridor acts as a permanent flashing warning light, ensuring that society remains eternally vigilant against the subtle creeping threats that target those who are just beginning their journey into adulthood. By openly confronting the dark realities of what happened along the highway, communities across the nation have fostered a culture of proactive protection, ensuring that the lessons learned from the lost lives of the past actively safeguard future generations from facing similar horrific fates anywhere in the world today and into the distant future, without exception or compromise, keeping everyone entirely safe right now. As the search for absolute accountability continues into the modern era, the collective memory of the victims remains the true anchor of the entire narrative, shielding their individual identities from the cold impersonality of police reports and true crime statistics. Every young woman and adolescent girl whose life was violently interrupted along the Texas highway, from Colette Wilson and Rhoda White in the 1970s to Heidi Fye and Laura Miller in the 80s to Kellyanne Cox and Jessica Kane in the 90s and beyond, was an irreplaceable human being with a distinct voice, a unique personality, and a boundless future that was stolen away far too soon. Their stories are a poignant testament to the fragility of human existence, but they are equally a testament to the extraordinary resilience of those who refuse to let their memories fade into the humid Texas mist. The overgrown ditches and murky waters of the marshland may still hold whispers of unsolved mysteries, but the overwhelming roar of progress, science, and unwavering human compassion drowns out those dark echoes, replacing them with a steady, resolute drumbeat of hope. The pursuit of truth along Interstate 45 is a journey that will continue for as long as there are unanswered questions remaining in the dark, driven forward by the sacred belief that every soul taken deserves absolute justice right here, right now, today. The final chapter of the Texas killing fields is still being written today, forged daily by the tireless efforts of scientists unlocking ancient genetic codes, detectives relentlessly pursuing forgotten leads, and families whose courage in the face of unimaginable tragedy continues to light the way forward through the darkest corridors of human history. The shadow of the highway will forever remain a permanent scar upon the landscape of the American South, but it is no longer an unchecked sanctuary for cruelty and despair. Instead, it stands as a powerful, enduring monument to the unstoppable force of collective memory, proving conclusively that while evil may attempt to erase the vulnerable in the quiet shadows of an isolated marshland, the unyielding pursuit of truth will always find a way to drag those hidden horrors out into the open, ensuring that justice, remembrance, and human dignity ultimately prevail over the darkness of the past. The precious souls lost along the asphalt will forever echo through the trees, demanding that we never look away from the ultimate truth, ensuring that their voices ring out across every generation as an eternal reminder of resilience, courage, and the absolute triumph of light over shadow, forevermore protecting every single person who travels down that road today and tomorrow without ever letting go of hope right now, here. As the long journey through the dark and twisting corridors of the Texas killing fields draws to a quiet, reflective close, one is left to ponder the profound and haunting silence that settles over the southern landscape when the noise of the modern world finally fades away. The stretch of Interstate 45 connecting Houston to Galveston is no longer just a physical highway or a mere conduit for the daily rhythms of commerce and travel. It has become an eternal landmark etched deeply into the conscience of humanity, a permanent reminder of the immense fragility of life and the terrifying depths of human depravity. When we look back across the decades, traversing the harrowing timeline from the hazy, sun-drenched 1970s through the turbulent 80s, 90s, and into the modern era, the sheer magnitude of the sorrow that unfolded across those 25 acres of overgrown marshland becomes almost too heavy to bear. Yet, it is precisely this weight that we must carry, because forgetting is the ultimate luxury of the safe and the untouched, a privilege that the victims and their grieving families were mercilessly denied. The stories of Colette Wilson, Rhoda White, Gloria Gonzalez, Heidi Fye, Laura Miller, Kelly and Cox, Jessica Kane, Christine Pynchon, and so many others who walked into the shadow of the highway and never returned are not merely historical footnotes or solved puzzles of a bygone era. They are vibrant, beating hearts whose sudden, violent extinction forever changed the spiritual geography of the region. The overgrown ditches, the murky water, and the rustling canopy of trees along the Calder Road corridor remain as silent, unyielding witnesses to a time when predators could slip effortlessly between the invisible cracks of a fractured legal system, operating in plain sight while ordinary families went about their daily lives entirely unaware of the darkness, waiting just a few feet away from the asphalt. To walk along that shoulder today, or to simply contemplate the vast expanse of the Texas coast, is to feel the phantom echo of steps cut short, of laughter silenced, and of bright futures stolen by men who viewed human life as nothing more than disposable chattel. It is a sobering, profoundly humbling experience that strips away any lingering illusions of absolute safety, reminding us that evil does not always wear a terrifying mask or lurk in the shadows. Let us remember, the legacy of these tragedies extends far beyond courtrooms and police files, seeping into the very institutional fabric of modern criminal justice. The catastrophic failures that allowed serial killers like William Lewis Reese, Edward Harold Bell, and Kevin Edison Smith to exploit jurisdictional boundaries for decades served as an urgent, agonizing wake-up call for law enforcement agencies across the United States. No longer could local police departments operate in isolated silos, turning a blind eye to missing persons reports simply because a county line separated them from an adjacent municipality. The painful lessons forged in the mud of the killing fields catalyzed a nationwide transformation in collaborative investigative practices, giving rise to advanced multi-jurisdictional task forces, centralized national databases, and sophisticated information sharing networks designed to catch predators before they could establish a pattern of destruction. Furthermore, the monumental advancements in forensic science, from the earliest days of crude blood typing to the revolutionary breakthroughs of modern genetic genealogy and DNA phenotyping, prove conclusively that time and environmental degradation can no longer guarantee absolute impunity for those who commit unspeakable acts against the vulnerable. Science became the voice of the voiceless, reaching back across decades of silence to extract microscopic strands of truth from forgotten evidence lockers, matching genetic markers to suspects who had long believed they had successfully buried their crimes forever. Yet, even as laboratories grow more advanced and protocols grow more unified, the true measure of reform is found not in technology alone, but in the unwavering vigilance of human empathy. The detectives, scientists, and advocates who dedicate their lives to these cold cases operate under a sacred moral imperative that every human being whose life is violently cut short deserves absolute dignity, a proper accounting, and a relentless pursuit of justice that never sleeps. This profound cultural shift ensures that the victims of the killing fields did not die in vain, transforming their collective tragedy into a permanent shield protecting future generations from slipping away into the dark, indifferent shadows of an unprotected highway corridor anywhere across the landscape of the modern world today, tomorrow, and for all time coming right now forever. Ensuring that light always triumphs over darkness through steadfast courage and unyielding dedication to the truth that sets every innocent soul free into eternal peace and divine grace without any further sorrow or pain ever again starting right here today. As we stand at the conclusion of this exhaustive exploration, our thoughts must return inevitably to the families who have carried the crushing burden of ambiguous loss for decades. The psychological toll of having a daughter, sister, or a mother vanish into thin air, only to be discovered years later in a state of advanced decomposition within an anonymous marshland, defies easy description or clinical analysis. It is a quiet, persistent grief that permeates every holiday dinner, every empty bedroom, and every silent night spent staring at a telephone that never rings with the news one so desperately prays to hear. Yet, amid this immense darkness, the families of the Texas killing fields have displayed an astonishing grace-under-fire resilience, banding together to form support networks, pushing legislative reforms, and keeping the names of their loved ones alive in the public consciousness when institutional indifference threatened to sweep them under the rug. They became the true champions of accountability, refusing to let the systemic failures of the past dictate the final chapter of their children's stories. Their courage reminds us that behind every true crime statistic, every cold case file, and every courtroom verdict lies a deeply human narrative defined by enduring love, profound loss, and an unbreakable bond that death itself can never truly sever. When we honor the victims by speaking their names aloud, by remembering their individual dreams, and by acknowledging the raw, unvarnished reality of their final moments, we strip away the morbid sensationalism that so often plagues the true crime genre, replacing it with a sacred, solemn reverence for human dignity. The marshland along Interstate 45 will forever be a haunted, scarred place, a physical monument to the darkest impulses of mankind, but it is equally a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who fought back against the silence. Their collective endurance ensures that the souls lost in the tall grass will never be forgotten by history, echoing eternally as a powerful, unwavering reminder that even in the deepest and most unforgiving shadows of the modern world, the relentless pursuit of truth and justice remains the ultimate light guiding humanity forward through every trial and tribulation imaginable right here today and forevermore into the great unknown horizon of tomorrow. May they rest in eternal peace, knowing their memories burn brightly across the generations to come without ever fading away into the night completely. As the final notes of this profound investigative chronicle fade into the quiet stillness of the evening, we are left with a solemn duty to carry forward the names and the stories that define the Texas killing fields across half a century of turbulence and heartbreak. The asphalt of Interstate 45 will continue its endless dance of commuter traffic, carrying thousands of travelers past the overgrown trees and murky drainage ditches without a second thought toward the ghost towns of memory hidden just beyond the shoulder. Yet for those who have walked this dark path, who have examined the evidence, read the trial transcripts, and listened to the echoes of grieving parents, the landscape is forever altered, transformed into a sacred repository of human endurance and moral accountability. We have looked unflinchingly into the abyss of multi-predator terror, dissected the bureaucratic blind spots that allowed evil to flourish, and witnessed the slow, grinding, yet ultimately triumphant machinery of modern justice drag those hidden horrors out into the blinding light of accountability. But above all, we have honored the victims, stripping away their anonymity to restore their identities as beloved daughters, sisters, friends, and young women whose unwritten chapters deserve to unfold under a benevolent sky. As we close this chapter and step back from the precipice of the marshland, let us carry their names in our hearts with unyielding reverence, ensuring that no matter how many years pass, no matter how overgrown the ditches become, and no matter how fast the world moves forward, their stories will remain an eternal beacon of remembrance, a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a solemn vow that truth and justice will always, without exception, prevail over the darkest. Shadows of the human heart for all eternity starting right here, right now, forevermore. May the memory of every lost soul guide our steps through the uncertain days ahead, inspiring boundless compassion, unwavering protection, and an eternal commitment to safeguarding the innocent against the creeping perils that seek to tear families apart, ensuring that goodness and light reign supreme across the vast expanse of our shared human experience until the end of time itself comes softly to embrace us all in profound and everlasting peace without ever looking back in fear or sorrow. Ever again, starting right now today, and forevermore, amen, peace be with them all always. As we step beyond the final horizon of this extensive and emotionally heavy chronicle, we are compelled to confront the deeper philosophical questions that linger in the wake of such profound historical trauma. The Texas killing fields is not merely a localized anomaly confined to the overgrown marshlands of Interstate 45, but a universal mirror reflecting the vulnerabilities inherent in our modern mobility and the dark, hidden complexities of the human condition itself. When we examine the vast expanse of time that separates the initial disappearances of the 1970s from the revolutionary genetic breakthroughs of the modern era, we witness a continuous, agonizing struggle between the forces of concealment and the relentless, unyielding expansion of human understanding. The highway itself, that roaring ribbon of concrete and asphalt, remains a vital monument to transition, but it is now permanently shadowed by the collective memory of those who were cruelly stolen from its shoulders. This dual nature of the corridor serving simultaneously as a bustling lifeline of commerce and a silent witness to unspeakable atrocity forces us to reevaluate how we perceive the everyday spaces we traverse without a second thought. We move through the world with an assumed sense of security, trusting implicitly in the permanence of our surroundings and the baseline safety of public infrastructure, rarely pausing to consider the thin, fragile veneer that separates our ordinary daily routines from unimaginable peril. The victims who walked those roads did not step into danger by conscious choice or reckless abandon. They simply participated in the ordinary rhythm of life, becoming unwitting targets for predators who understood with chilling clarity how to exploit the quiet, unmonitored spaces that exist on the margins of our bustling society. To remember them properly is to acknowledge this chilling reality without yielding to a paralyzing, irrational fear, maintaining instead a proactive vigilance that honors their lives through active protection, community awareness, and an enduring commitment to safeguarding the vulnerable wherever they travel across our shared human experience today and forevermore throughout the entire modern world, ensuring that no innocent soul is ever forgotten in the dark shadows while protecting every precious heart always and forever from similar tragedies occurring anywhere in society today. Amen. The evolution of how society consumes, analyzes, and processes true crime narratives has also undergone a profound and necessary transformation as a direct, undeniable result of these decades-old tragedies. In an era where sensationalism, morbid curiosity, and entertainment-driven media formats frequently threaten to overshadow the solemn human reality of criminal investigations, the enduring legacy of the Texas killing fields demands a much higher, uncompromising standard of ethical storytelling. The victims of this desolate, overgrown corridor must never be reduced to mere plot points in a macabre entertainment loop, nor should the complex, agonizing struggles of their grieving families ever be trivialized or exploited for dramatic effect. Every single young woman and adolescent girl whose life was abruptly and violently cut short possessed an entire, vibrant universe of potential, a distinct and irreplaceable personality, and a web of deep emotional connections that were shattered in a single fraction of a second. When investigators, journalists, authors, and documentarians approach these painful cold cases, they bear a solemn, heavy ethical responsibility to center the absolute humanity of the victims above all else, ensuring that the focus remains firmly fixed on the pursuit of truth, the delivery of meaningful accountability, and the restoration of dignity to those who were silenced. This ethical shift requires extraordinary patience, unwavering empathy, and rigorous factual accuracy, firmly rejecting speculative sensationalism in favor of deep, respectful, and comprehensive analysis. By treating every single case file with the solemn reverence it truly deserves, society successfully transforms true crime from a passive form of morbid escapism into a powerful, active engine for justice, systemic reform, and eternal remembrance. The families who fought for decades to keep the names of their daughters alive in the public consciousness did not do so to satisfy idle public curiosity. They did so because their beloved children deserved to be remembered as whole, complete human beings who lived with purpose, laughed with joy, and loved deeply before their bright futures were cruelly torn away by absolute darkness throughout the entire history of modern true crime storytelling. Looking toward the future with a steady and resolute gaze, the invaluable lessons learned from the decades of systemic failure, institutional fragmentation, and investigative roadblocks along the Interstate 45 corridor continue to serve as an indispensable blueprint for modern law enforcement and criminal justice practice worldwide. The painful, hard-earned realization that rigid jurisdictional silos, bureaucratic indifference, and primitive forensic tools allowed multiple independent predators to operate with virtual impunity for years has permanently reshaped how law enforcement agencies collaborate across municipal, county, and state boundaries. Today, the seamless integration of advanced cross-jurisdictional task forces, real-time digital intelligence sharing networks, and sophisticated behavioral profiling ensures that modern criminals can no longer hide behind invisible administrative lines or exploit the bureaucratic gaps between neighboring police departments. Furthermore, the relentless, breathtaking advancement of genetic genealogy, advanced DNA phenotyping, and microscopic evidence re-examination has fundamentally rewritten the rules of cold case investigation, proving conclusively that time is no longer an absolute ally to those who seek to evade justice. Modern science is transformed into a tireless, incorruptible advocate for the dead, capable of speaking eloquently across decades of environmental decay and whispering the absolute truth from the dust and mud of an overgrown marshland. Yet, as powerful and revolutionary as these technological tools undoubtedly are, they remain entirely dependent upon the human will to utilize them with relentless dedication. The true engine of justice is, and always will be, the unwavering determination of investigators, forensic scientists, and passionate advocates who refuse to close a file simply because the trail has gone cold or the years have piled high. It is this resilient human element, the stubborn, compassionate refusal to abandon the forgotten souls of the past, that ensures the devastating mistakes of the old era will never be endlessly repeated, forging a much stronger, wiser, and more unified shield to protect future generations from hidden dangers in our rapidly changing modern world today. As this comprehensive, multi-part investigative exploration finally draws to its ultimate, solemn, and reflective close, we are left standing in the quiet, contemplative stillness of a landscape that has witnessed both the worst depths of human depravity and the most profound, soaring heights of human resilience and moral courage. The 25-acre marshland along Interstate 45 will forever remain a scarred, haunted space, carrying the silent, rustling whispers of a dark historical era that can never be completely erased from the collective memory of mankind. Yet, the true, enduring legacy of the Texas killing fields is not found in the crushing sorrow of the past, but in the unbreakable, indomitable strength of the human spirit that rose up collectively to challenge the darkness. It lives on vibrantly in the tireless parents who marched for decades demanding unyielding answers, in the dedicated, sleepless detectives who spent their entire careers chasing fading clues, and in the enduring public commitment to ensuring that no innocent soul is ever truly lost to history. The names of Colette Wilson, Rhoda White, Gloria Gonzalez, Heidi Fye, Laura Miller, Kellyanne Cox, Jessica Kane, Christine Pynchon, and every single unnamed victim whose tragic story remains locked securely within the dust of the archives will continue to echo powerfully across the generations as an eternal testament to human courage and resilience. They remind us firmly that even when evil attempts to erase the vulnerable in the quiet shadows of an isolated wilderness, the collective, unyielding pursuit of truth and justice will always find a radiant way to drag those hidden horrors out into the blinding light of accountability. May their cherished memories burn brightly forever, guiding our footsteps toward a safer, wiser, and infinitely more compassionate world where every precious life is deeply cherished, steadfastly protected, and honored with absolute, unwavering reverence for all eternity, starting right here, right now, today and forevermore into the great horizon of tomorrow, ensuring everlasting peace and grace for every single innocent soul. As we cross the final threshold of this sprawling and profoundly moving chronicle, we find ourselves standing once again at the metaphorical edge of the 25-acre marshland along Interstate 45, looking out across a landscape that has been forever altered by history. The road continues its relentless, daily rhythm of motion, carrying modern travelers between Houston and Galveston in a blur of motion and sound, seemingly untouched by the ghosts of the past. Yet, for anyone who has journeyed deeply into the intricate, heartbreaking details of the Texas killing fields, the asphalt can never look the same way again. It is no longer just a stretch of highway, but a living monument to human vulnerability, a silent archive of sorrow, and a powerful testament to the enduring tenacity of those who refuse to let the darkness have the final word. The journey we have taken together through these 10 exhaustive chapters has required us to look unflinchingly into the deepest recesses of human cruelty, to examine the tragic failures of a fractured legal system, and to witness the slow, agonizing, yet ultimately triumphant march of modern justice as it dragged hidden horrors out into the blinding light of accountability. We have walked the overgrown trails of Calder Road, relived the quiet panic of sudden disappearances, honored the precious memories of young lives stolen far too soon, and marveled at the incredible resilience of families who spent decades navigating an unbearable purgatory of ambiguous loss. Through every twist and turn of the multi-predator puzzle, through every technological breakthrough in genetic genealogy, and through every hard-fought courtroom battle, one absolute truth has remained entirely constant: the unyielding power of human memory and the sacred moral imperative that demands absolute dignity for the innocent. As we bring this comprehensive exploration to its quiet and contemplative close, we carry forward not a morbid fascination with violence, but a profound, transformative respect for the lives that were lost and the enduring legacy of truth that continues to guide humanity forward through every trial and tribulation imaginable right here today and forevermore into the great, uncertain horizon of tomorrow, ensuring that no soul is ever forgotten in the dark shadows. The overarching narrative of the Texas killing fields forces us to confront a fundamental paradox of the human condition, one where the greatest achievements of modern society exist side by side with our most primitive and destructive impulses. We live in a world of astonishing mobility, instant global communication, and breathtaking technological innovation, where physical distance is easily conquered and the boundaries of human knowledge expand exponentially with each passing day. Yet, as the dark history of the Interstate 45 corridor so starkly demonstrates, these very advancements can sometimes create new forms of vulnerability, masking ancient perils beneath a comforting veneer of everyday routine and high-speed convenience. The predators who hunted along the highway did not possess supernatural powers or magical concealments. They simply mastered the art of weaponizing the quiet, unmonitored spaces that inevitably exist on the rapid margins of our bustling modern civilization. They understood with chilling precision how to exploit the brief, ordinary pauses in a young woman's day: a walk to a local store, a stop at a public payphone, a wait at a roadside bus stop, transforming mundane moments of routine transit into fatal traps. This sobering reality strips away the naive, comforting illusion that danger is always exotic, distant, or easily identifiable, reminding us with absolute clarity that evil can comfortably wear an ordinary mask, blend seamlessly into the background noise of everyday commerce, and strike with terrifying speed in broad daylight. To acknowledge this truth is not to succumb to a paralyzing, irrational fear of the world around us, but rather to cultivate a mature, proactive vigilance rooted in community awareness, mutual protection, and an unwavering commitment to watching out for one another. By maintaining this heightened sensitivity to the safety of the vulnerable, we transform the tragic lessons of the past into a living shield that actively guards against the creeping perils of the modern world, ensuring that the mistakes and vulnerabilities of previous generations are never needlessly repeated anywhere in our shared global society today, tomorrow, or in the distant years to come, keeping every precious human life safe under a benevolent sky. Moreover, the profound legacy of the Texas killing fields has permanently revolutionized how society approaches the investigation, documentation, and ethical storytelling of true crime, setting an entirely new and uncompromising standard for justice and accountability. In an era where sensationalism, morbid curiosity, and entertainment-driven media formats frequently threaten to reduce human tragedies to mere background noise, the memory of the victims from the Texas highway demands a much higher level of solemn reverence, factual accuracy, and ethical responsibility. The young women and adolescent girls whose lives were so abruptly and violently cut short, from Colette Wilson and Rhoda White in the 1970s to Heidi Fye and Laura Miller in the 80s, and from Kellyanne Cox and Jessica Kane in the 90s and beyond, were never mere statistical data points or convenient plot devices for a dramatic narrative. They were vibrant, complete human beings with distinct personalities, unique aspirations, deep emotional connections, and entire, unwritten universes of potential that deserve to unfold naturally over the course of a long and fulfilling life. When investigators, forensic scientists, journalists and documentarians approach these enduring cold cases today, they do so with a profound awareness of this sacred humanity, ensuring that the focus remains firmly fixed on the pursuit of truth, the delivery of meaningful legal accountability, and the restoration of absolute dignity to those who were silenced for far too long. This ethical evolution has transformed true crime from a passive form of morbid escapism into a powerful, active engine for systemic reform, institutional cooperation, and eternal remembrance. The families who fought tirelessly for decades to keep the names of their daughters alive in the public consciousness did not do so to satisfy idle curiosity. They did so because their beloved children deserved to be remembered as whole, complete individuals who lived with purpose, laughed with joy, and loved deeply before their bright futures were cruelly torn away by absolute darkness. Their courage and perseverance have ensured that the systemic failures of the past, the rigid jurisdictional silos, the uncommunicative bureaucracies, and the primitive investigative tools have been systematically dismantled and replaced by a modern, highly coordinated network of interagency task forces, centralized digital databases, and revolutionary genetic technologies that ensure no predator can ever again use a county line as an invisible shield against justice. As we stand at the ultimate conclusion of this exhaustive 10-part chronicle, our thoughts must return once more to the enduring spirit of the families who bore the heaviest, most agonizing burdens of this multi-decade tragedy. The psychological toll of having a daughter, sister, or mother vanish into thin air, only to be discovered years later in a state of advanced decomposition within an anonymous marshland, defies easy description or clinical categorization. It is a quiet, persistent grief that permeates every holiday dinner, every empty bedroom, and every silent night spent staring at a telephone that never rings with the news one so desperately prays to hear. Yet, amid this immense darkness, the families of the Texas killing fields displayed an astonishing, grace-under-fire resilience, banding together to form support networks, pushing for vital legislative reforms, and keeping the names of their loved ones vibrantly alive in the public consciousness when institutional indifference threatened to sweep them under the rug. They became the true, unwavering champions of accountability, refusing to let the tragic oversights of history dictate the final chapter of their children's stories. Their courage reminds us definitively that behind every cold case file, every courtroom verdict, and every scientific breakthrough lies a deeply human narrative defined by enduring love, profound loss, and an unbreakable bond that death itself can never truly sever. When we honor the victims by speaking their names aloud, by remembering their individual dreams, and by acknowledging the raw, unvarnished reality of their final moments, we strip away the sensationalism that so often plagues the genre, replacing it with a sacred, solemn reverence for human dignity that will echo down through the generations. The marshland along Interstate 45 will forever remain a haunted, scarred place, a physical monument to the darkest impulses of mankind, but it is equally a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who fought back against the silence with relentless grace and unyielding determination. The truest and most lasting reflection of the Texas killing fields belongs entirely to the memory of the victims themselves, whose individual voices have finally been reclaimed from the dust and mud of the overgrown ditches. For far too long, the 30-plus young women and girls whose lives were stolen along that desolate 25-acre corridor ran the grim risk of being reduced in the public imagination to mere anonymous footnotes in the dark history of American crime, overshadowed by the morbid fascination surrounding the various monsters who hunted them. Yet, beneath the harsh reality of advanced biological decomposition, the hostile marshland ecosystem, and the calculated indignities inflicted by men like Edward Harold Bell, William Lewis Reese, and Kevin Edison Smith, each victim remained a complete, vibrant human being waiting for the world to finally listen to her story with the respect and sorrow she always deserved. By refusing to let their names fade into the quiet humidity of the Texas coast, by demanding truth through decades of agonizing silence, and by honoring their memories with unwavering dignity, society ensures that their voices are never truly lost to the ravages of time. The overgrown trees and murky waters along the highway will forever whisper of unsolved mysteries, but the overwhelming roar of scientific progress, institutional reform, and deep human compassion drowns out those dark echoes, replacing them with a steady, resolute drumbeat of hope that resonates across the entire landscape of modern true crime storytelling. The pursuit of truth along Interstate 45 has been a long, arduous, and heartbreaking journey, but it is a journey that has ultimately proven that even in the deepest and most unforgiving shadows of the modern world, the relentless pursuit of truth and justice remains the ultimate light guiding humanity forward through every trial and tribulation imaginable. As the final notes of this profound 10-part investigative chronicle fade into the quiet stillness of the evening, we are left with a solemn, inescapable duty to carry forward the names and the stories that define the Texas killing fields across half a century of turbulence, heartbreak, and resilience. The asphalt of Interstate 45 will continue its endless, bustling dance of commuter traffic, carrying thousands of travelers past the overgrown trees and murky drainage ditches without a second thought toward the ghost towns of memory hidden just beyond the shoulder. Yet for those who have walked this dark path, who have examined the evidence, read the trial transcripts, and listened to the echoes of grieving parents, the landscape is forever altered, transformed into a sacred repository of human endurance and moral accountability. We have looked unflinchingly into the abyss of multi-predator terror, dissected the bureaucratic blind spots that allowed evil to flourish, and witnessed the slow, grinding, yet ultimately triumphant machinery of modern justice drag those hidden horrors out into the blinding light of accountability. But above all, we have honored the victims, stripping away their anonymity to restore their identities as beloved daughters, sisters, friends, and young women whose unwritten chapters deserve to unfold under a benevolent sky without fear or interruption. As we close this final chapter and step back from the precipice of the marshland, let us carry their names in our hearts with unyielding reverence, ensuring that no matter how many years pass, no matter how overgrown the ditches become, and no matter how fast the world moves forward, their stories will remain an eternal beacon of remembrance, a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a solemn vow that truth and justice will always, without exception, prevail over the darkest shadows of the human heart for all eternity, starting right here, right now, forevermore. May the memory of every lost soul guide our steps through the uncertain days ahead, inspiring boundless compassion, unwavering protection, and an eternal commitment to safeguarding the innocent against the creeping perils that seek to tear families apart, ensuring that goodness and light reign supreme across the vast expanse of our shared human experience until the end of time itself comes softly to embrace us all in profound and everlasting peace without ever looking back in fear or sorrow. Ever again, starting right here today, and forevermore, amen, peace be with them all always. As we stand upon the threshold of this final chapter, looking out across the vast, enduring expanse of the southern landscape, we find ourselves enveloped in a profound and contemplative stillness. The Texas killing fields, that 25-acre patch of overgrown marshland and tangled brush shadowing the relentless traffic of Interstate 45, has yielded all the secrets it is ever likely to surrender to the living, yet its presence remains an indelible scar upon the collective conscience of a nation. The highway continues its endless, rushing dance of commerce and transition, carrying thousands of travelers past the historical markers of tragedy without a second thought to the ghosts that linger just beyond the shoulder. Yet, for those who have walked this dark path through memory and investigation, who have traced the harrowing steps of the victims and shared the agonizing weight of the families, the landscape is permanently transformed. It is no longer just a stretch of asphalt connecting Houston to Galveston. It has become an eternal sanctuary of sorrow, a timeless testament to the devastating cost of human indifference, and a solemn monument to the unbreakable resilience of those who refuse to let the darkness have the final word. The journey we have shared across these expansive chapters has taken us deep into the heart of an American nightmare, forcing us to confront the terrifying reality of multi-predator violence, the fatal flaws of institutional fragmentation, and the slow, grinding machinery of justice that took decades to drag hidden horrors out into the light. As we draw this comprehensive chronicle to its ultimate, meditative close, we are compelled to look beyond the cold statistics of police logs and the complex mechanics of courtroom trials, returning our focus entirely to the human soul of the narrative, ensuring that the legacy left behind is one of profound remembrance, unwavering vigilance, and the absolute triumph of light over shadow. The true weight of the Texas killing fields does not rest solely in the grim forensic details of advanced decomposition or the chilling confessions extracted from men like Edward Harold Bell, William Lewis Reese, and Kevin Edison Smith, but rather in the profound, irreplaceable absence left behind in the lives of ordinary families. The young women and adolescent girls whose promising existences were so violently and prematurely extinguished along that desolate corridor were never meant to be historical footnotes or forgotten case files gathering dust in municipal archives. They were vibrant, complete human beings who laughed, dreamed, loved, and stumbled through the messy, beautiful transition from childhood innocence to youthful independence. From Colette Wilson and Rhoda White in the 1970s, to Heidi Fye and Laura Miller in the 80s, to Kelly and Cox and Jessica Kane in the 90s and beyond, each victim possessed a unique voice and an entire unwritten universe of potential that deserved to unfold under a benevolent sky. The agonizing reality that their final moments were spent in terror within the isolated marshland is a reality that weighs heavily upon the soul of humanity, reminding us with unyielding clarity of the fragile boundary that separates the safety of a normal, routine afternoon from an irreversible tragedy. Yet, it is precisely this immense, heavy sorrow that forged an extraordinary, unbreakable bond among the surviving relatives and dedicated advocates who took up the torch of accountability. These families did not allow the systemic failures of the past to bury the names of their daughters in silence. Instead, they transformed their personal heartbreak into a powerful, enduring force for reform, demanding truth, pushing for institutional change, and ensuring that the world would never look away from the human cost of negligence. Their tireless courage stands as the truest beacon of hope in a dark history, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that love is far more powerful than cruelty, and that memory is an indestructible shield that time itself can never truly wear away. The structural and investigative evolution born from the ashes of these tragedies has fundamentally reshaped the landscape of modern American criminal justice, ensuring that the catastrophic errors of the past can never be easily repeated along our nation's transit corridors. The painful, hard-earned lessons taught by the decades of lost evidence, uncoordinated jurisdictional silos, and missed opportunities have catalyzed a nationwide revolution in collaborative law enforcement practice. Today, sophisticated regional task forces, centralized digital intelligence sharing networks, and seamless cross-jurisdictional cooperation agreements ensure that a predator can no longer utilize an invisible municipal or county line as a safe harbor against accountability. Furthermore, the breathtaking, revolutionary advancements in forensic science, transforming from the primitive, unreliable techniques of the early decades into the ultra-sensitive genetic genealogy and DNA phenotyping of the modern era, have proven conclusively that time and environmental degradation can no longer guarantee absolute immunity for those who prey upon the vulnerable. Science has become a tireless, incorruptible advocate for the dead, reaching across decades of silence to extract microscopic strands of truth from forgotten evidence lockers and matching genetic profiles to suspects who long believed their secrets were safely buried in the mud. Yet, as powerful and sophisticated as these technological tools undoubtedly are, they remain fundamentally dependent upon the steadfast human will to utilize them with relentless dedication. The true engine of justice is, and always will be, the compassionate determination of investigators, scientists, and advocates who refuse to abandon the forgotten souls of the past, ensuring that every cold case remains an active, ongoing promise that truth will eventually prevail, no matter how many years have passed since a victim last walked the shoulder of the highway. As we step back from the precipice of the marshland and bring this profound, 10-part exploration to its final, contemplative resting place, we are left with a quiet, inescapable duty that extends to every person reading or listening to these words. We must carry the names and the stories of the Texas killing fields forward into the future, not with a morbid fascination for the darkness, but with a deep, reverent commitment to safeguarding the innocent and honoring the memories of those who were lost. The asphalt of Interstate 45 will continue its endless, bustling dance of commuter traffic, carrying thousands of travelers past the overgrown trees and murky drainage ditches without a second thought toward the ghost towns of memory hidden just beyond the shoulder. Yet, for those who know the history, the landscape is forever altered, standing as a solemn reminder of the eternal vigilance required to protect our communities against the creeping perils that seek to tear families apart. We have looked unflinchingly into the abyss of multi-predator terror, dissected the bureaucratic blind spots that allowed evil to flourish, and witnessed the slow, triumphant machinery of modern justice drag those hidden horrors out into the blinding light of accountability. But above all, we have honored the victims, stripping away their anonymity to restore their identities as beloved daughters, sisters, friends, and young women whose unwritten chapters deserve to unfold in peace. Let us hold their memories in our hearts with unyielding reverence, ensuring that no matter how fast the world moves forward, their stories remain an eternal beacon of remembrance, a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a solemn vow that truth, justice, and human dignity will always prevail over the darkest shadows of the human heart for all eternity, starting right here, right now, forevermore, ensuring everlasting peace and grace for every single innocent soul resting softly in the gentle embrace of eternity without ever looking back in fear or sorrow ever again.